The call came at 2:17 in the morning, which is never good. Sarah Chen had learned over 20 years in the emergency room that nothing good happens after midnight. The phone's glow cut through her dark Portland apartment like a scalpel, and she knew before answering that her life was about to change. It was Mrs. Patterson from Meadowbrook Heights, her mother's neighbor, and the woman's voice carried that particular tremor that comes right before someone delivers bad news they've been dreading. "Sarah, you need to come. Your mother has been served with foreclosure papers. She's sitting in her garden crying. She won't let anyone help her. You need to come now." 2 hours. That's how long it took Sarah to drive from her cramped apartment in Portland to her mother's house in Meadowbrook Heights, a gated community she'd always found slightly ridiculous with its manicured lawns and rules about which shade of beige was acceptable for mailboxes. 2 hours to replay every conversation with her mother over the past 6 months, searching for warning signs she'd missed. 2 hours to berate herself for not visiting more often, for letting her own divorce and career consume her, while Rose Chen sat alone in a house that was apparently being taken from her. The security guard at the gate knew her, waved her through without the usual visitor protocol. Even he looked somber, like he understood she was driving toward catastrophe. Rose Chen was 81 years old, though she moved like someone a decade younger on good days. On bad days, arthritis turned her elegant hands into claws that could barely grip a coffee cup. Today, Sarah discovered, was the worst kind of day. She found her mother in the bamboo grove behind the house, surrounded by papers she couldn't open because her swollen fingers wouldn't cooperate. The garden had always been Rose's sanctuary, planted by Sarah's father Thomas 43 years ago, when they'd first bought the house. The bamboo stood 12 feet tall now, swaying gently in the pre-dawn breeze, and in the dim light from the porch, Sarah could see her mother's shoulders shaking. "Mama, what happened?" Rose looked up, and Sarah saw something she'd never seen before in her mother's eyes. Not just fear, but defeat. Rose Chen had survived the Cultural Revolution, immigration with nothing but hope in a suitcase, widowhood when Thomas died 6 years ago. Sarah had watched her mother face down racism, poverty, and loss with a spine made of steel. But right now, sitting among Thomas's bamboo with legal documents scattered around her like fallen leaves, Rose looked broken. "Thomas planted this bamboo 43 years ago," Rose said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Vivian Ashford says it's illegal. She's taking our home, Sarah, the home your father built." Sarah gathered her mother into her arms, feeling how thin she'd become, how fragile. Guilt crashed over her in waves. When had she last really looked at her mother? When had she last visited for more than a hurried Sunday lunch? She'd been so consumed by her own disasters, her own divorce from David, and the wreckage of her marriage, that she'd missed her mother falling apart. She collected the papers Rose couldn't open, carried them inside, made tea the way Thomas used to, strong and sweet. And as the sun rose over Meadowbrook Heights, painting the bamboo grove in shades of gold, Rose told her the story. It had started 8 months ago, though Sarah was only learning about it now. Rose had been working on a family history project for the Community Heritage Committee, researching old county records, tracing the Chen family's roots in Oregon. In a dusty archive box, she'd found something unexpected. A ground lease document from 1949, signed by her mother Lily Chen. 800 acres leased to developers for 75 years at $500 a year. Sarah stopped her. "Mama, what 800 acres? You rent this house." "No, Baobei. My mother owned 800 acres. We leased 60 acres to developers in 1949. Your grandmother left it all to me when she died. I left it all to you." The implications took a moment to settle in Sarah's exhausted brain. She looked around the modest kitchen, at the linoleum that needed replacing, the appliances from the 1980s. If Rose owned 800 acres of Oregon land, why was she living like someone barely scraping by? Rose explained patiently, the way she always did when Sarah was slow to understand. The land under Meadowbrook Heights, all the common areas, the roads, the park, the clubhouse, it had all been leased. And according to the documents she'd found, that lease had expired 3 months ago. Everything was supposed to revert to the Chen family. Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. "You're telling me you own this entire community?" "We own the land under it, But I'm old and confused. Who will believe me? Vivian says I'm making it up. Sarah knew the name Vivian Ashford. Everyone in Meadowbrook knew that name. The HOA president for 12 years, a woman who ran the community with what people politely called a firm hand and what others called an iron fist. Sarah had met her exactly once, at a 4th of July barbecue 5 years ago, and had found her smile cold and her eyes calculating. "You told the HOA board about this?" Rose nodded, reaching for papers with shaking hands. "I showed them the documents 3 months ago. Vivian said they were invalid, said her attorneys confirmed the HOA owned everything free and clear. Then the violation notices started." Sarah looked at the stack of official-looking letters, each one on Meadowbrook Heights HOA letterhead, each one detailing some supposed violation. Unapproved bamboo species, improper garden structures, mailbox incorrect color, on and on, a litany of manufactured infractions, each carrying a fine. $50, $100, $200. The amounts escalated like a fever chart. Within 3 months, Rose had accumulated $4,800 in fines. A lien had been filed on her house. Foreclosure proceedings had begun. Sarah felt something cold and hard forming in her chest, something that felt like the opposite of the helplessness that had defined the past 5 years of her life. She'd felt helpless during her marriage to David, helpless when the fertility treatments failed, helpless through the divorce. But looking at these papers, at the systematic destruction of her mother's peace, she felt something else entirely. She felt angry. "I need to make a phone call," Sarah said. The attorney's name was James Rothman, and he'd been Rose's lawyer since Thomas died. He arrived at the house by 9 that morning, a man in his late 60s who moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent 50 years navigating legal minefields. He spread the documents across Rose's dining table and studied them with an expression that grew increasingly grave. "Mrs. Chen, these ground lease documents are legitimate. I've verified them with county records. The lease expired on June 1st of this year. All common properties should have reverted to you." "Then why is the HOA claiming they own it?" Rothman looked at Sarah over his reading glasses. "Because most title searches only go back 40 or 50 years. The original lease was filed in 1949. Unless someone specifically requested a full chain of title search, it wouldn't show up. And I suspect Vivian Ashford knew that." Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find a man standing on the porch, someone she didn't recognize. He was in his early 50s, with kind eyes and the slightly rumpled look of someone who spent more time thinking than worrying about appearances. "Mrs. Chen? I'm Marcus Hayes. Your attorney sent me. I inherited the farmland adjacent to Meadowbrook last month. We need to talk." Marcus Hayes had a story that paralleled Rose's in unexpected ways. His grandmother had owned 800 acres bordering Meadowbrook Heights. When she died, she'd left him the land along with a final instruction: "Make sure Lily Chen's family gets justice." I promised her. The two women, Marcus explained, had been friends decades ago. They'd corresponded over the years, shared information about the ground leases, watched as the original quiet community transformed into something else entirely under new management. His grandmother had tried to warn him about Vivian Ashford, but she died before she could explain everything. Now, spreading survey maps across the table next to Rothman's documents, Marcus showed them how the properties overlapped, how Meadowbrook Heights sat squarely on land that had been leased, not sold 75 years ago. Land that now belonged to Rose and to him. "Why should we trust you?" Sarah asked, her ER nurse instincts making her suspicious of anyone offering help. Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Because my grandmother's last words were about keeping promises to dying women. I keep those promises. And because Vivian Ashford has been lying to this community for years, and someone needs to stop her." Something in his tone reminded Sarah of the good doctors she'd worked with, the ones who fought for their patients rather than their egos. She found herself believing him. "I need to meet this Vivian Ashford," Sarah said. The HOA office was located in the Meadowbrook Clubhouse, a building that seemed designed to intimidate with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Vivian Ashford's private office was tucked in the back, and the woman herself rose from behind a mahogany desk like she was greeting a subordinate rather than a resident's daughter. She was 58, Sarah learned later, though she could have passed for younger. Perfectly tailored suit, expensive jewelry, the kind of calculated elegance that money and control could buy. But it was her eyes that Sarah noticed most. Cold eyes, evaluating eyes, eyes that saw people as problems to be managed or eliminated. The walls were covered with photos of a teenage boy. Dark hair, bright smile, frozen forever at 16. Ms. Chen, Vivian said, her voice carrying that particular sweetness that Sarah had learned to recognize as danger. I'm so sorry about the confusion with your mother. She's elderly, and I'm afraid she's become somewhat confused about property boundaries. Sarah had dealt with people like Vivian before. Her ex-husband David had used the same tactics, the same dismissive sweetness while systematically destroying her confidence. She'd learned, too late, to recognize gaslighting. She wasn't making that mistake again. My mother isn't confused. She has documented proof that your HOA is built on leased land. Land that belongs to my family. Vivian's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in those cold eyes. I understand this must be distressing for you, but our legal team has confirmed clear title. These old documents your mother found are ancient history. Perhaps you should focus on her health rather than these fantasies. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. I'm an ER nurse, Ms. Ashford. I know the difference between confusion and clarity. My mother is completely lucid, and I'm hiring an independent title company to verify everything. For exactly 3 seconds, Vivian's mask slipped. Sarah saw cold fury, calculation, threat. Then the smooth smile returned. Of course, that's your right, but legal fees are expensive and your mother can barely afford her medication. Perhaps you should consider whether pursuing this is really in her best interests. Sarah stood, gathering her things with deliberate calm. Oh, I know exactly what you're doing. My ex-husband used the same tactics for years. It won't work. That evening, Sarah received a visitor she hadn't expected. Leonard Whitmore was 68, a retired history professor who lived 3 doors down from Vivian. He arrived at Rose's door carrying a banker's box and an expression of grim determination. You need to see this, he said without preamble. I've been documenting Vivian's activities for 3 years, ever since she forced the Martinez family out over a decorative fountain. Inside the box was a chronicle of systematic abuse, violation notices, foreclosure threats, before and after photos of homes that Vivian had acquired through shell companies after driving out their owners. 23 families, Leonard had documented, forced out through manufactured violations and mounting fines. 17 of those homes had been purchased by companies Leonard had traced back to Vivian or her relatives. But the folder marked Rose Chen was the one that made Sarah's hands shake. Leonard had documented everything. The board meeting 3 months ago where Rose had presented the ground lease documents. Vivian's immediate dismissal of them. The first violation notice, issued exactly 1 week later, targeting the bamboo grove that Thomas had planted. The escalating fines, the threats, and in the margins, Leonard had made notes in his careful academic handwriting, pattern consistent with previous targets. Elderly, living alone, limited income, vulnerable. Rose wasn't random, she was selected. Sarah looked up at Leonard, this careful man who'd spent 3 years documenting injustice. Why are you showing me this now? Because you're the first person who looks angry enough to fight back. Everyone else has been too scared. That night, Sarah made the decision that would change everything. She called her supervisor at the hospital and gave her 2 weeks' notice. After 20 years of saving lives in the emergency room, she was taking a leave of absence. She didn't know if it would be permanent. She only knew her mother needed her more than the hospital did. Rose protested. Of course. Sarah, you can't quit your job for me. I'm an old woman. This house isn't worth your career. Sarah took her mother's hands, feeling the twisted joints, the thin skin, the tremor of age and arthritis. This isn't about the house, Mama. This is about whether we let bullies destroy people or whether we stand up and fight. Over the next week, Leonard introduced Sarah to a network she hadn't known existed. Women Vivian had targeted. Women who'd been too afraid to speak up, too isolated to fight back. Margaret Sullivan was 73, a widow whose husband had built her a bird feeder before he died. Vivian had fined her $800 for it, claiming it attracted pests. When Margaret couldn't pay, Vivian had threatened foreclosure. Margaret had sold her home at a loss to a shell company that Leonard later traced to Vivian's ex-husband. My husband built that feeder, Margaret said, tears in her eyes. It was all I had left of him, and she took it. Patricia Okoye was 62, a Nigerian immigrant and retired teacher who'd planted a vegetable garden. Vivian had called it ethnic and inappropriate for the neighborhood's aesthetic. The fines had started immediately. Diane Fletcher was 45, a single mother whose son had cerebral palsy. She'd become Vivian's chief enforcer, the compliance committee chair, because Vivian had promised her son could use the community pool for water therapy if Diane cooperated. Now, Diane sat in Rose's living room, crying. I enforced her cruel rules because I was terrified. I became a bully to protect my child. I'm so ashamed. Ana Morales was 32 and 7 months pregnant. She and her husband had bought their home 2 years ago based on Vivian's written assurance that the HOA owned all common land free and clear. Now their mortgage was at risk because that assurance had been a lie. Sarah listened to each story, feeling the pattern emerge. Vivian targeted the vulnerable, the elderly, the immigrants, the single mothers, people with limited resources and even more limited power. She weaponized bureaucracy against people who couldn't fight back. But there was one more thing Sarah needed to understand. She needed to know why. Late one night, unable to sleep, Sarah researched Vivian Ashford's background. She found archived news articles from 8 years ago, and they told a story that made her chest tighten with unexpected empathy. Prom night tragedy. Local teen killed by drunk driver. Daniel Ashford, 16 years old, straight A student, designated driver for his friends. Killed instantly when Brendan Sawyer, 18, drunk and high, ran a red light. Brendan's wealthy family had hired expensive lawyers. A technicality in evidence handling. 18 months of house arrest. That's what the judge had given him. Sarah found Vivian's victim impact statement, read it in the blue glow of her laptop screen. My son followed every rule. He did everything right, and he's dead because someone else didn't. I will spend the rest of my life making sure rules are followed, so no mother suffers what I'm suffering. Sarah understood in that moment how grief could twist into something unrecognizable. How the need to control, to prevent, to protect could become its own kind of tyranny. She'd felt it herself after her divorce, after the fertility treatments failed, after she'd realized she'd never have the children she dreamed of. Grief had made her withdraw, made her build walls. But Vivian's grief had made her build a prison, and she'd locked everyone inside with her. The next morning, Sarah showed the articles to Rose. I know about Daniel, Rose said quietly. I attended his funeral. Vivian was broken. We all were. He was a good boy. Does knowing about her son change anything? Rose considered this. Her gnarled hands wrapped around her teacup. It explains. It doesn't excuse. I lost Thomas too. Grief is grief, but I didn't destroy families because of it. Sarah felt something settle in her chest. Her mother was right. Sympathy didn't erase harm. Understanding didn't justify cruelty. Over the following days, the women organized. They met at Rose's house, where Vivian's surveillance couldn't reach them. Patricia created spreadsheets documenting every violation, every fine, every pattern of abuse. Margaret preserved emails and letters. Diane's tech-savvy son retrieved deleted Facebook posts and board meeting minutes. Anna gathered testimony from families Vivian had driven out. And Rose, frail but fierce, made tea and provided what she called bamboo wisdom. In China, when I was young, women had no power, Rose told them. We learned to be like bamboo, bend when we must, but root deep. And when the time comes, grow unstoppable. We are bamboo now. It became their motto, whispered among themselves like a battle cry. We are bamboo. Marcus proved invaluable, providing survey maps and connecting them with his attorney, but he was careful to let Sarah lead. Most men would try to take over, Sarah observed one evening when he dropped off documents and immediately left. My wife taught me that the best help is the help someone asks for, not the help you assume they need. Sarah noticed the past tense. Taught? Cancer, 3 years ago. Emily was extraordinary. Sarah found herself telling him about David, about the divorce, about the years of being told she was too emotional, too sensitive, too demanding, about how she'd lost herself trying to become what someone else wanted. We've both been through the fire, Marcus said simply. And we're still here. It wasn't romance. It was recognition. Two people who'd survived loss and come out the other side still capable of fighting for what was right. The breakthrough came when Rothman's young associate, Priya Kulkarni, discovered something in the county records. Vivian had filed a satisfaction document in 2021, claiming the ground lease had been paid off and extinguished. The document looked official. It had fooled title companies. It had fooled homeowners. But Priya, who'd grown up in the digital age and understood how to trace documents through databases, found the truth. The satisfaction was real, but it applied to a completely different lease in a completely different county. Someone had altered the legal description and refiled it with false reference numbers. Forgery. Sophisticated forgery by someone with legal knowledge and access to county systems. The trail led to Richard Ashford, Vivian's ex-husband, a paralegal who'd worked at a law firm with county clerk access. He'd filed the fraudulent document right after Vivian received the first warning letter about the lease expiring. She knew, Sarah said, looking at the evidence. For 3 years, she knew this was all built on lies, and she kept lying. The community meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the county hall. Vivian tried to stop it, posting frantic messages on the HOA's private Facebook group about fraud and carpetbaggers and greedy outsiders trying to steal their homes. But Rothman had sent certified letters to every single homeowner. Letters that used words like title defect and access termination and mortgage default. Fear is a powerful motivator. 200 people showed up. The night before the meeting, Sarah sat with her mother in the bamboo grove. The stalks swayed in the evening breeze, and Sarah could almost feel her father's presence, could almost hear his voice in the rustling leaves. "Your father planted this bamboo the week you were born," Rose said. "He said something beautiful for something beautiful. Every time you visited as a child, you played here. This is your heritage, Sarah. Not just land, memory, love, resistance." Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. "Mama, what if we lose? What if Vivian destroys everything?" Rose took her daughter's hand, and despite the arthritis, despite the tremor of age, her grip was strong. "We already lost everything once when Thomas died. Then we rebuilt. If we lose the house, we still have each other. That's what Vivian doesn't understand. You can't foreclose on family." Sarah hugged her mother, feeling the fragility and the strength, the bamboo flexibility that had carried Rose through war and immigration and widowhood. And she understood, finally, what her mother had been trying to teach her all along. Strength wasn't rigidity. It was the ability to bend without breaking. That night, Marcus stopped by with more documents. Sarah met him at the door, and he could see the determination in her eyes. "This isn't your fight," Sarah said. Marcus smiled. "It's everyone's fight now. But yes, it's yours to lead. Just know you're not alone." From her chair by the window, Rose watched them and nodded slowly. "He's right. We're not alone. We're bamboo. And bamboo grows in groves, stronger together." Sarah felt something shift inside her, something that had been broken during her marriage, during the divorce, during the long years of feeling powerless. She was finding her strength again, not the rigid strength of someone who never bends, but the flexible strength of bamboo, the strength to bend in storms and grow back taller. "Then let's grow," Sarah said. The meeting was set for 7 p.m. Thursday. Sarah had 3 days to prepare, 3 days to gather her coalition of women, to organize testimony, to steel herself for the battle ahead. But standing in her mother's bamboo grove, feeling the connection of roots that ran deeper than any legal document, Sarah knew she was ready. Vivian Ashford had picked the wrong family to destroy. Rose Chen had survived the Cultural Revolution, immigration, racism, and widowhood. Sarah Chen had survived an abusive marriage, infertility, and divorce. They were Chen women. They were bamboo. And they were about to show Meadowbrook Heights what happens when you try to cut down a grove that's been rooting deep for 75 years. The bamboo swayed in the evening wind, patient and unstoppable, waiting for the storm it knew was coming. And in that grove, surrounded by her mother's strength and her father's memory, and a coalition of women who'd found their voices, Sarah Chen made a promise. They would fight, they would bend but not break, and they would win. Because that's what bamboo does. It survives everything, grows through everything, and eventually, nothing can stop it. The war was just beginning, but Sarah was ready. She was bamboo now, too. The county hall on Thursday evening looked like a pressure cooker about to explode. Sarah arrived 30 minutes early and found the parking lot already three-quarters full. Cars were still streaming in, headlights cutting through the dusk like searchlights. People walked toward the building in tight clusters, their faces tense with the particular anxiety that comes from learning your entire life might be built on a lie. Sarah helped Rose from the car, her mother moving slowly despite the walker, oxygen tank clicking rhythmically with each labored breath. Margaret appeared from the growing crowd and took Rose's other arm without being asked. This was how the coalition worked now, Sarah had learned. Silent coordination. Women who'd been isolated and afraid finding strength in numbers. Vivian Ashford was already inside. Sarah could see her through the glass doors. She'd arrived with 3 men in expensive suits, attorneys from a Portland firm whose billable hours probably exceeded Sarah's annual salary. They stood around Vivian like sentries, briefcases gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. Marcus, carrying a box of documents, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp. He'd become an unexpected anchor over the past week, always available but never intrusive, supporting without controlling. "You ready for this?" he asked. Sarah looked at her mother, at Margaret and Patricia and Diane gathering around them, at Leonard setting up a laptop and projector with the careful precision of someone who'd planned this moment for 3 years. She thought about the 23 families Vivian had destroyed, the systematic cruelty disguised as order, the way power could corrupt when left unchecked. "No," Sarah said honestly, "but we're doing it anyway." The meeting room held 250 people when packed. Tonight, it held closer to 300. They lined the walls, sat in aisles, crowded around doorways. The air buzzed with nervous energy and whispered speculation. Sarah scanned the faces and saw fear, confusion, anger, and, in some eyes, the dawning realization that they'd been lied to for years. Vivian had claimed the floor first, invoking some parliamentary procedure about order of business. The county commissioner, a weathered rancher named Warner, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, had allowed it with a weary shrug. Let her talk first. Sometimes you need to hear the lie before the truth makes sense. Vivian's presentation was masterful, Sarah had to admit. Polished PowerPoint slides, professional graphics, a timeline showing the community's growth under her leadership, charts demonstrating property value increases, testimonials from satisfied residents. She painted Meadowbrook Heights as a success story, a beacon of order in a chaotic world. Then she pointed directly at Sarah. "These people are carpetbaggers trying to steal your homes using fabricated documents. Rose Chen is elderly and confused. Her daughter is exploiting her for financial gain." Sarah felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She kept her face neutral, her hands steady on her mother's wheelchair. Years of ER nursing had taught her to stay calm under pressure. Lives had depended on it. This was no different. Vivian produced her own documents, sliding them across the table to Commissioner Warner. "Our attorneys have confirmed clear title. The lease these people reference was satisfied and extinguished in 1982. Here's the recorded satisfaction document." The room shifted. Sarah felt it like a physical thing, the crowd's fear easing slightly. Official documents were comforting. They meant order, certainty, the stability people desperately wanted to believe in. Sarah leaned toward Rothman. "Is that real?" He was already studying a copy, his experienced eyes scanning the fine print. "It's real. But something's wrong. Give me 24 hours. Vivian's voice rose, warm and maternal now, the voice of someone who genuinely cared. "I've dedicated my life to this community. After losing my son, you became my family. I would never lie to you. I would never let anyone hurt you." She touched a photo on the screen, the same teenage boy whose pictures filled her office. Daniel, frozen forever at 16, his bright smile a weapon she wielded expertly. Several people in the audience were crying now. Sarah recognized the manipulation, but understood it worked because it was partially true. Vivian had lost her son. Grief had shaped her into something monstrous, but the grief itself was real. The meeting adjourned for the night with a promise to reconvene in 48 hours. People filed out looking relieved, their faith in Vivian's version of reality temporarily restored. Sarah watched them go and felt the weight of the battle ahead settle on her shoulders. Leonard approached, laptop in hand. "That satisfaction document is fake." I know it. We just need to prove it. Priya Kulkarni worked through the night. Sarah learned this later, how the young attorney had consumed enough coffee to wake the dead and dived into county records with the relentless energy of someone who saw injustice as a personal insult. By 7 the next morning, she called Rothman with findings that would change everything. The document was real in the sense that it existed and had been properly filed. But the lease it satisfied wasn't the Meadowbrook ground lease. It was for a completely different property in a completely different county from 1979. Someone had altered the legal description, changed property identification numbers, and refiled it in Meadowbrooks County with false references. Sophisticated forgery, the kind that required legal knowledge and access to county filing systems. Priya traced the filing. Richard Ashford had submitted it in late 2021, right after Vivian received the first certified letter warning about the lease expiration. Richard, who'd worked as a paralegal at Whitman and Associates, who had county clerk access through his firm, who divorced Vivian 2 years earlier in what court records described as a bitter dissolution. He did it for her, Priya said over the conference call, her voice tight with anger. She paid him. I found a wire transfer from one of Vivian's shell companies to Richard's account 3 days before the filing. $20,000. Sarah sat in Rose's kitchen listening to this, watching her mother's hands shake around her teacup. She thought about the systematic nature of it, the premeditation, the calculated exploitation of people's trust. Can we prove it? Sarah asked. Already sent everything to the county prosecutor, Priya replied. Forgery of government documents is a felony. They're opening an investigation. The second community meeting felt different from the start. Word had leaked about the forgery investigation. Sarah didn't know how, suspected Leonard's network of retired academics who still had contacts in county government, but it didn't matter. People arrived looking less certain, more willing to question what they'd been told. Sarah had prepared differently this time. No PowerPoint, no professional graphics, just Rose's story and the voices of women Vivian had destroyed. They gathered at the front of the room, this coalition of the wounded. Margaret with photos of her late husband's bird feeder, Patricia with her garden planted in the traditional Nigerian style her mother had taught her, Anna, heavily pregnant now, holding her daughter's hand, Diane, no longer Vivian's enforcer, but someone desperately trying to atone, and Rose, frail in her wheelchair, but with eyes that had seen too much to fear anymore. Sarah stood before the crowd and felt her ER training kick in. Present the facts, stay calm, let the truth speak for itself. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm an emergency room nurse. For 20 years, I've treated people in crisis. I've learned that the most dangerous wounds are the ones you can't see, the ones that happen slowly, systematically, until suddenly you realize you're bleeding out. She projected the survey map, the same one Marcus had shown her weeks ago. The crowd leaned forward, seeing their streets, their homes, their perfect little community contained within a red boundary line labeled ground lease parcel. Expires June 1st, 2024. This is your community, Sarah said simply. Built on land my grandmother leased in 1949. That lease expired 4 months ago. This isn't fraud, it's documented history. She showed the original 1949 lease, yellowed with age but clear in its terms. 75 years. Common property reverts upon expiration. Signed by Lily Chen and witnessed by a notary whose stamp was still visible. Vivian stood up. This is theatrical nonsense. Our attorneys have confirmed those documents are invalid. Sarah met her gaze. Then your attorneys are either incompetent or complicit, because the county prosecutor is currently investigating the forged satisfaction document you presented at our last meeting. The room erupted. Commissioner Warner banged his gavel until silence grudgingly returned. Sarah yielded the floor to her coalition. One by one, they told their stories. Margaret spoke about the bird feeder her dying husband had built, about Vivian's $800 fine, about losing her home of 30 years to a shell company she later discovered belonged to Vivian's ex-husband. My husband built that feeder with his own hands, when the cancer made him too weak to do much else. He said he wanted the birds to remember him. Vivian called it a pest attractant and said it had to go. When I couldn't pay the fine, she threatened foreclosure. I sold my home in a panic. Found out later she bought it through a fake company. She's renting it now for twice what my mortgage payment was. Patricia told the room about being called ethnic, about having her heritage reduced to an aesthetic problem, about the fines that accumulated until she felt afraid in her own home. I'm Nigerian. I'm American. I taught American history for 30 years to students in this county. And Vivian Ashford made me feel like I didn't belong because I planted okra instead of roses. Ana Morales, her pregnancy making it difficult to stand for long, described buying their dream home based on Vivian's written assurance that the HOA owned all common land free and clear. We have emails, we have signed documents. Vivian personally told our realtor everything was perfect. Now our mortgage company says we might be in default because the title isn't clear. We could lose everything because she lied. Diane Fletcher's testimony cut deepest because it came from someone who'd been complicit. I enforced Vivian's rules because she threatened my son's access to water therapy. He has cerebral palsy. The pool is the only place he can move without pain. So when Vivian said find Margaret for her bird feeder or your son can't swim, I fined Margaret. When she said cite Patricia for her garden or lose pool access, I cited Patricia. I became a monster to protect my child. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. The room was silent except for the sound of people crying. Then Rose spoke. Sarah helped her mother to the microphone, adjusting the height so Rose wouldn't have to strain. The oxygen tank hissed softly. Rose's hands trembled on the walker. But when she began speaking, her voice carried the weight of 8 decades of survival. I am 81 years old. I came to America when I was 19 with nothing but hope and a husband who'd survived war. Thomas Chen came home from Korea with nightmares and shaking hands. We worked 3 jobs, we saved, we bought land, we built a life. She paused, gathering strength. The audience waited, completely still. For over 40 years, Thomas and I lived in our home. We raised our daughter. We planted our garden. Thomas said bamboo represents resilience. We planted it the day Sarah was born. Through droughts, through freezes, through everything, that bamboo grew. Rose's voice hardened. Then Vivian Ashford decided my bamboo was illegal, not because of any real violation, because I found documents proving her lie, because I threatened her control. She fined me into poverty. She threatened me in my own home. She told my daughter I was senile. She tried to erase me. The crowd was transfixed. This wasn't statistics or legal arguments. This was an 81-year-old widow being systematically destroyed. But I'm still here. The bamboo is still here. And the truth is still true, no matter how much Vivian wishes it wasn't. The standing ovation started in the back and swept forward like a wave. Commissioner Warner let it continue for 10 seconds, unprecedented in county meeting protocol. When silence returned, Leonard approached the podium with his banker's box. For 3 years, he explained calmly, he documented Vivian's pattern of abuse, 23 families targeted, 17 homes acquired by shell companies, millions in property value transferred from vulnerable residents to Vivian's hidden portfolio. He projected emails, violation notices, foreclosure threats. The crowd watched their community's dark history unfold slide by slide. Then Priya took over, and her presentation was devastating in its simplicity. Reserve Fund, January 2020, she said, showing HOA financial records. $127,000. Your money, saved for emergencies, repairs, community improvements. Next slide. Special legal assessment, August 2021. Withdrawal of $65,000 to Ashford Consulting Group. The room stirred. Someone called out, "What's Ashford Consulting Group?" Priya smiled grimly. Good question. It's a company registered to Richard Ashford, Vivian's ex-husband. It had exactly one client, this HOA. It dissolved in 2022. The money vanished. She projected bank records, corporate filings, dissolution documents. The paper trail was clear. Vivian had withdrawn $65,000 of community funds, funneled it through her ex-husband's shell company, and the money had disappeared. "That's our money," someone shouted from the middle of the room. "She stole from us!" The crowd's mood shifted from uncertainty to fury in seconds. This wasn't abstract legal theory anymore. This was their money, stolen by someone they'd trusted. Priya wasn't finished. She showed email exchanges between Vivian and real estate agents, young couples asking about clear title. Vivian's responses, smooth and confident. "The HOA owns all land free and clear. No title issues. I'll provide the standard documentation." Ana Morales stood up, her hand on her swollen belly. That's the email she sent our agent. Based on that lie, we bought our house. Our mortgage company is now threatening to call the loan. We could lose our home because she lied. The meeting dissolved into chaos, people shouting questions, others demanding Vivian's resignation. Commissioner Warner's gavel barely made a dent in the noise. Vivian tried to speak, her voice shrill above the tumult. "You don't understand! I was trying to buy the land! I was protecting this community! The $65,000 was to negotiate with the developers! I was saving you!" Commissioner Warner finally restored order. "Ms. Ashford, did you have board authorization for that withdrawal?" Silence. Vivian's attorneys whispered urgently to her. "Did you disclose the ground lease issue to homebuyers?" More silence. Vivian's perfect facade was cracking. Sarah could see it happening in real time, the way control slipped away when the lies became too heavy to maintain. The recall petition was waiting in the lobby. Sarah hadn't organized it, suspected Leonard had, but it didn't matter. 73 signatures in 30 minutes. 84% of homeowners demanding Vivian's immediate removal. An emergency board meeting was called for the following evening. Vivian didn't attend. The vote was unanimous. Vivian Ashford, president for 12 years, was removed from office. Diane Fletcher was elected interim president on a platform of transparency and healing. Her first act was to apologize to every family Vivian had targeted. "I was complicit in this abuse. I let fear make me cruel. That changes now. No more secret rules, no more targeting vulnerable people, no more silence." Sarah thought it might be over. Vivian was removed. The truth was public. The community was healing. But she'd underestimated what a cornered narcissist would do. The lawsuit arrived 3 days later. Wellington and Associates, one of Portland's most expensive firms. Sarah read the complaint and felt her stomach drop. Ashford versus Hayes. Adverse possession. Prescriptive easement. Emotional distress. Vivian was claiming that 75 years of continuous use meant the land had transferred ownership, and she was seeking $4.5 million in damages. Rothman's face was grim when they met. "This is a nuisance suit designed to bankrupt you. Even if we win, legal fees could exceed $300,000. Discovery alone will cost a fortune." Sarah felt the familiar weight of helplessness threatening to return. "I can't afford that. My divorce took everything." Rose touched her daughter's hand. "Then we sell the land, Bao Bei. It's not worth your future." But Sarah looked at her mother, at the way grief and stress had accelerated her decline, at the oxygen tank that was now a constant presence, at the tremor that had gotten worse over the past month. This land was Rose's heritage, Thomas's memory, the bamboo grove where Sarah had played as a child. "It's your land, Mama. Your history." "You are my history," Rose said firmly, "not dirt." The next morning, Sarah found an envelope slipped under Rose's door. Inside was a cashier's check for $100,000 made out to Rothman's trust account. The note attached was brief. "For the Chen women, for the bamboo that bends but never breaks. A friend." Investigation revealed the donor, William Chen, Rose's cousin from California. A retired engineer Sarah had met exactly twice in her life. When she called him, his voice was warm and certain. "Thomas saved my life in Korea. Took a bullet meant for me. I owed him everything. Let me do this." Sarah tried to thank him, found herself crying instead. "Win," William said simply. "That's how you thank me. Beat that woman and show the world that Chen women don't break." But Vivian wasn't done attacking. If she couldn't win legally, she'd destroy Sarah's reputation instead. The website appeared first. The truth about Sarah Chen, professional design, slick graphics, and lies wrapped in just enough truth to be devastating. Sarah's failed marriage to David, her fertility struggles, private medical information somehow obtained and published, her allegedly abandoning her mother for years while pursuing her career. Photos from her darkest days during the divorce, looking hollow-eyed and defeated, taken from David's social media and used without permission. The narrative was clear. Sarah was a bitter, childless divorcee, exploiting her elderly mother for inheritance money, a failed woman grasping for significance through someone else's tragedy. Sarah read it at 2 in the morning, alone in Rose's kitchen, and felt something inside her crack. These were her deepest wounds. The private failures she'd barely processed herself, now weaponized and displayed for public consumption. Diane found her at dawn, still sitting at the kitchen table, the website open on her laptop. "Sarah, none of this is true. Everyone who knows you knows this is garbage." But Sarah couldn't stop reading the comments. People she'd never met, strangers who knew nothing about her life, calling her greedy, manipulative, a parasite. And worse, people from Meadowbrook she'd seen at meetings, people who claimed to know the real Sarah Chen wasn't the saint everyone thought. The worst part was David's interview, posted prominently on the homepage. Her ex-husband, the man who'd spent 5 years systematically destroying her confidence, now publicly validating Vivian's narrative. Sarah was always manipulative. She probably convinced her mother these delusions were real. I'm not surprised she's pulling the scam. Diane physically closed the laptop. Listen to me, Vivian is desperate. She's using the oldest trick in the playbook. When you can't attack the argument, attack the person. Especially if that person is a woman. Make her look hysterical, bitter, damaged. Sarah knew this was true. She'd studied it in the hospital. The way female doctors faced different standards than male ones. The way women's pain was dismissed as emotional while men's was treated as legitimate. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. The coalition responded with a campaign of their own. Patricia wrote an op-ed for the county newspaper. Margaret organized letters from ER patients Sarah had saved over 20 years. Anna created video testimonials from families Sarah had helped. But the most powerful response came from Rose. Patricia had filmed it without telling Sarah, just Rose sitting in the bamboo grove, the late afternoon sun filtering through the stalks. Her voice weak but determined. My daughter Sarah sacrificed everything for me. When Thomas died, she flew home every weekend for a year. When I had my stroke, she quit her job to fight for me. A job she loved, saving lives. Rose looked directly at the camera, her aged eyes fierce. People say she's doing this for money. We don't have money, we have bamboo and memories. She's doing this because I taught her that when someone tries to erase you, you plant yourself deeper. You grow taller. You become unstoppable. Sarah is my bamboo, and Vivian Ashford has no idea what she's unleashed. The video went viral locally. 400,000 views in 48 hours. Comments flooded in, but these were different. People defending Rose, defending Sarah, calling out Vivian's manipulation. Sarah watched the view count climb and felt something shift. The isolation was breaking. The silence was ending. Women she'd never met were sharing their own stories of being dismissed, manipulated, gaslit by people in power. One morning, Sarah found herself at the county courthouse filing documents and encountered Vivian in the hallway. They'd managed to avoid each other since the second community meeting, but now they stood 3 feet apart, alone in the marble corridor. Vivian looked different. No expensive suit today, just jeans and a faded sweater, no makeup. Her hair needed washing. The polished facade had crumbled, revealing something rawer underneath. Are you happy now? Vivian asked. You've destroyed me. Everything I built. Sarah felt a dozen responses rise in her throat. Anger, accusations, triumph. But looking at this broken woman, she felt something unexpected. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. She saw what grief and fear could do to a person, how the need for control could become its own kind of prison. I read about Daniel, Sarah said quietly. I'm sorry for your loss. Vivian's face contorted. Don't you dare say his name. I know grief makes us do terrible things. After my divorce, after learning I'd never have children, I became someone I didn't recognize. Grief is a monster, but Vivian, you're feeding it. You're letting it consume you and everyone around you. You don't understand, Vivian whispered. I understand more than you think. But there's a difference between us. I got help. I went to therapy. I learned that controlling everything doesn't prevent loss. It just prevents living. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. If I let go, if I stop protecting, it all falls apart. It's already falling apart, Sarah said gently. You've lost the community. You're facing criminal charges. Emma won't speak to you. When does it end? When you drop this lawsuit and leave my community alone. It's not your community, Sarah said. It never was. It's our community. All of us, including my mother, who you tried to erase. Vivian walked away, her shoulders shaking. Sarah watched her go and felt no satisfaction. Just sadness for what trauma could do. How loss could twist into something unrecognizable. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Vivian, about Daniel, about how thin the line was between healing and destruction when grief came calling. At 2 a.m, she walked out to the bamboo grove and found Marcus sitting on the bench Thomas had built. Couldn't sleep either, he asked. broken. Sarah sat beside him. I keep thinking about Vivian, about how she lost her son, and it broke her. About how I lost the chance to be a mother, and it almost broke me. The only difference is I had people who helped me find my way back. Who did Vivian have? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Emily used to say that empathy doesn't mean excusing harm. You can understand someone's pain and still hold them accountable for what they do with it. Sarah nodded. Your wife sounds like she was wise. She was. And she'd tell you that what you're feeling right now, this compassion even for someone who hurt you, that's not weakness. That's strength. They sat in the bamboo grove until dawn, not talking much, just being present while the stalks swayed overhead. Sarah thought about strength, about the difference between the rigidity that breaks and the flexibility that survives. She thought about her mother's words. We are bamboo. The fire started at 2:17 in the morning, exactly 1 week later. Sarah would remember that detail forever, because she'd looked at the clock when the first smoke alarm went off, had thought fire and Rose's oxygen tank in the same heartbeat of terror. She ran to her mother's room, found Rose already awake, eyes wide with fear. Fire, Sarah. I smell smoke. Sarah helped her mother from bed, grabbed the oxygen tank, and got Rose outside in less than 90 seconds. Training took over. Get the patient to safety, then assess. From the lawn, they watched the community center burn. Flames erupted from the south wing, climbing toward the roof with terrifying speed. The building that had been the symbol of Vivian's control, the clubhouse where rules had been enforced and lives had been ruined, was being consumed by fire. Fire trucks arrived within 10 minutes. Too late to save the structure, but soon enough to keep it from spreading. Sarah held Rose and watched $800,000 of community assets turn to ash and smoke. By dawn, fire marshal investigators were combing through the rubble. Sarah overheard their preliminary assessment. Arson, multiple points of origin, accelerant used, professional work. Leonard appeared as the sun rose, his face grim. His security cameras had captured something. A figure in a dark hoodie, approaching the building at 1:47 a.m., carrying a container. The footage was grainy, shot from too far away to identify the person clearly, but the build was right. Female, approximately 5'6", a distinctive limp in the left leg, the same limp Vivian had from an old injury, sustained when she collapsed at Daniel's funeral 8 years ago. Sarah felt sick. This is what desperation looks like, she thought. This is what happens when control slips away completely. The fire marshal interviewed her that morning, his questions sharp and probing. Ms. Chen, you have the most to gain from this fire. The property reverts to you. Insurance pays out. You could rebuild however you want. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Or Vivian burns evidence of embezzlement before forensic accountants finish their audit. The marshal's expression didn't change. We'll be investigating all possibilities. By afternoon, search warrants had been executed on multiple properties. Sarah learned later what they found. In Vivian's garage, a gas can matching the accelerant type. In her car trunk, clothing with soot and chemical residue. On her phone, deleted messages to an unknown number sent the day before the fire. The arrest happened at 6 p.m. Sarah wasn't there but heard about it from a dozen sources. Vivian in handcuffs, being led from her house while neighbors watched. No polished facade now, no control, just a woman who'd lost everything, including herself. That evening, Sarah sat with Rose in the bamboo grove, watching smoke still rising from the community center ruins. Marcus had stopped by earlier, offered resources, offered support, but respected that this moment belonged to the Chen women. Thomas said bamboo survives fire, Rose murmured. Roots protected underground, after fire, grows back stronger. Sarah held her mother's hand, feeling the tremor that never stopped now, the weakness that seemed to increase daily. Mama, what if we can't survive this? What if she destroys everything? Rose squeezed her daughter's hand with surprising strength. We already lost everything once when Thomas died. Then we rebuilt. If we lose the house, we still have each other. That's what Vivian doesn't understand. You can't foreclose on family. Sarah felt tears on her face, but they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of understanding. Her mother had been teaching her this lesson all along. Strength wasn't about never bending. It was about bending and bouncing back, about roots that ran deep enough to survive any fire. The bamboo swayed in the evening breeze, patient and eternal. Some of the stalks were scorched from the fire's heat, but the grove itself stood untouched, survived, resilient. "We're bamboo," Sarah said softly. Rose smiled. "Now you understand." That night, the coalition gathered at Rose's house, all of them. Margaret and Patricia and Diane and Anna with her newborn baby, born 3 days earlier and named Rosa after Rose Chen. Leonard with his documentation. Marcus with his quiet support. And Sarah with her mother, both of them stronger than anyone had believed possible. They talked long into the night about what came next. Criminal charges against Vivian, the community rebuilding, the choices they'd have to make about the land, about the future, about what kind of place Meadowbrook Heights would become. But mostly they talked about survival, about women who'd been isolated and afraid finding their voices, about a community that had lived under tyranny learning what freedom meant, about bamboo that bends in storms and grows back taller. Sarah looked around the room at these women who'd become her family, at her mother dozing in her chair, at the bamboo grove visible through the window. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, about quitting her job and moving home and finding purpose she hadn't known she was searching for. She thought about her ex-husband David, about the years she'd spent believing his narrative that she was too much or not enough, never just right, about how she'd lost herself trying to become what someone else wanted. But sitting here now, surrounded by women who'd found their strength together, Sarah knew she'd found something more valuable than the approval she'd once craved. She'd found herself. Not the broken version Vivian had tried to paint, not the desperate version David had created, but the real Sarah Chen. Strong because she could bend, powerful because she could feel, unbreakable because she knew how to break and rebuild. The bamboo outside swayed in the night wind, and Sarah understood its lesson completely now. You survive by being flexible, by rooting deep, by growing in groves where other stalks support you when storms come. Vivian had tried to be rigid, to control everything, to stand alone against chaos. And she'd broken. The Chen women were bamboo, and bamboo doesn't break. It bends, it survives, and eventually it grows so tall and so strong that nothing can cut it down. The war was far from over, but Sarah was ready for whatever came next. She was bamboo now, and so was her mother. And so were all these women who'd found each other in the darkness and decided to grow toward the light together. Let the storm come, Sarah thought. We'll bend, we'll survive, we'll win, 'cause that's what bamboo does. The state fire marshal arrived the morning after Vivian's arrest, a woman named Rebecca Torres, who had the weathered look of someone who'd seen too many people lie about fires they'd set themselves. She sat across from Sarah in Rose's kitchen, a digital recorder between them, and her first question felt like an accusation. "Ms. Chen, you stand to gain significantly from this fire. The property reverts to you. Insurance pays the HOA $800,000. You could rebuild whatever you want without community input. Walk me through where you were between midnight and 3 a.m. Sarah had expected this, had known the moment the flames started that she'd be a suspect. In the emergency room, she'd learned that the obvious answer was usually correct, and she was the obvious answer. Woman fighting for inherited land, community center burns. Simple math. I was asleep in my mother's house until 2:17 when the smoke alarm woke me. I got my mother to safety. Then I called 911. You have the recording. Torres consulted her notes. Your mother requires oxygen. Oxygen tanks and fire are a dangerous combination. Some might say convenient timing that you got her out safely. Sarah felt anger rising, but kept her voice level. My mother is 81 years old with severe mobility issues. If I'd wanted to burn the building, I wouldn't have done it with her sleeping 50 yards away hooked to an oxygen tank. Torres's expression didn't change. Unless you wanted to establish an alibi. Rescue your mother, play the hero, deflect suspicion. Sarah looked at the fire marshal and saw what she was doing. Applying pressure, watching for cracks. It was good police work. It was also wrong. You found accelerant in Vivian Ashford's garage. You found her clothing with chemical residue. You found deleted messages on her phone. But you're sitting here questioning me because I'm an easier narrative. The greedy daughter destroying evidence is cleaner than the disgraced HOA president burning her own legacy. Torres leaned back slightly. We investigate all possibilities, Ms. Chen. Then investigate the fact that Vivian Ashford had 800,000 reasons to burn that building. Forensic accountants were 3 days from finishing their audit. The community center's financial records were stored in that building. Now they're ash. Who benefits from that? The interview lasted another hour, but Sarah could tell the moment Torres shifted from viewing her as suspect to witness. It was a subtle thing, a slight relaxation in posture, questions that became less aggressive and more investigative. When Torres left, Sarah found her hands shaking. The adrenaline crash hit hard, and she had to sit down before her legs gave out. Marcus appeared in the doorway, having waited outside during the interview, and his presence was quietly reassuring. You okay? Sarah laughed, but it came out bitter. I just got accused of arson. My mother's health is declining daily. We're fighting a $4 million lawsuit, and Vivian Ashford is probably going to claim the fire was my fault. So, no, not really okay. Marcus sat across from her, and his next words surprised her. Emily used to say that the moment you think you can't take any more is usually the moment right before breakthrough. Not because things get easier, but because you discover you're stronger than you knew. Sarah felt tears threatening and pushed them back. I'm tired of being strong. I'm tired of fighting. I just want my mother to have peace. Then we make sure she gets it, Marcus said simply. However long it takes. The preliminary hearing happened faster than anyone expected. Vivian's expensive attorneys tried to delay, citing their client's mental health, but the prosecutor pushed hard. Flight risk, danger to community, pattern of escalating behavior. The judge agreed. 30 days to preliminary hearing, then trial date would be set. Sarah spent those 30 days watching her mother decline. Rose's lucid moments became less frequent. The oxygen tank settings increased. Hospice nurses started making daily visits, their gentle efficiency a reminder that time was running out. But Rose insisted on testifying. On her good days, when her mind was clear and her spirit fierce, she made Sarah promise. I need to look that woman in the eye one more time. I need her to know she didn't break me. The community fractured during those 30 days in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. Not everyone saw Vivian as a villain. Some remembered the community she'd built, the property values she'd increased, the order she'd maintained. Others, particularly older residents who valued stability above all, feared what came next more than they resented what had been. The divide became visible at a community meeting Diane called to discuss reconstruction. The room split almost immediately into factions. Patricia and Margaret led the justice group, voices hard with righteous anger. That woman destroyed families. She stole from us. She burned our community center. She deserves maximum punishment, no mercy. But Diane surprised everyone by taking a different position. She's clearly mentally ill. Daniel's death broke her. Punishment won't fix that. She needs help, not just prison. Ana Morales, holding her newborn daughter, spoke quietly but firmly. How does sending her to prison for 20 years help anyone? How does that heal our community? Margaret stood up, face flushed. She drove me from my home. She bought it through a fake company and profits from my grief. You want me to feel sorry for her? No, Anna said. I want you to decide if revenge or healing matters more. The meeting dissolved into arguments that cut deeper than the original conflict with Vivian. These were neighbors turning on neighbors, old resentments surfacing, philosophical divides about justice versus mercy that had no easy answers. Sarah sat silent through most of it, feeling the weight of decisions she didn't want to make. Finally, Rose spoke from her wheelchair, voice weak but cutting through the chaos. Stop! All of you sit down! The room quieted. Rose Chen commanded respect that transcended politics. You are all right, and you are all wrong. Vivian must face consequences. That is justice. But consequences can include healing, not just punishment. That is mercy. We can demand accountability and hope for her redemption. These are not opposites. Rose looked at Sarah. What do you think, Baobei? Sarah felt every eye turn to her. She thought about her ex-husband David, about the years of emotional abuse, about whether she'd have wanted him punished or helped. She thought about Vivian's son Daniel, frozen forever at 16. She thought about the difference between justice and revenge. I think we let the legal system decide her punishment, Sarah said carefully. That's not our choice. But how we respond to her brokenness, that is our choice. We can support Emma, who did nothing wrong. We can rebuild better than before. We can show that women don't have to become cruel to be strong. The room remained divided, but the shouting stopped. Patricia nodded slowly. Diane wiped tears. Margaret still looked angry, but less certain. It wasn't resolution. It was acknowledgement that some questions don't have simple answers. 3 days before the hearing, Sarah did something she'd been avoiding. She requested a visitor meeting with Vivian at the county jail. Everyone thought she was crazy. Rothman advised against it. Marcus questioned her reasoning. Even Rose looked uncertain. But Sarah needed to understand, needed to look this woman in the eye and see if there was anything left worth saving. The county jail visiting room was exactly as depressing as she'd imagined. Plastic chairs bolted to the floor, thick glass partition, phones on either side like some twisted parody of intimacy. Vivian appeared in an orange jumpsuit that seemed to swallow her frame. Her hair unwashed, her face bare of the makeup that had always been armor. She looked small. That was Sarah's first thought. This woman who terrorized a community looked small and broken and frighteningly human. "Why are you here?" Vivian's voice through the phone sounded hollow. Sarah didn't know how to answer that honestly. "Because I need to understand. Why my mother? Why target an 81-year-old widow?" Vivian was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice cracked. "Because she wouldn't stop. Because she found documents I'd spent 3 years trying to bury. Because she threatened everything I'd built." "The community wasn't yours to build," Sarah said quietly. "After Daniel died, that community was all I had. The rules, the order, the control. It meant I was doing something. If I could keep everything perfect, maybe I could prevent another tragedy." "You can't control death, Vivian. I know." Vivian's tears started falling. Mascara-free rivulets down her cheeks. "I know that now. But for 8 years I tried, and I destroyed people trying. Your mother, those families, my own daughter. Emma won't speak to me. Did you know that?" Sarah had known. Emma had told her. "She's in town. She gave me your computer files." Vivian's face crumpled. She turned on me. "She's trying to save you. From yourself. That's what children do when they love parents who are self-destructing." "I don't deserve her love." "Maybe not," Sarah agreed. "But she loves you anyway. That's grace. That's what you failed to show anyone else." Vivian looked at her through the glass partition, this woman who tried to destroy her family, and asked the question Sarah hadn't expected. "Your mother, is she okay? After the fire, after everything?" Sarah felt something shift, some small crack in her anger. "She's alive. Weak, but alive. Tell her I'm sorry." Vivian's voice broke completely. "I know it doesn't change anything, but tell her Daniel would be ashamed of what I became, and I'm ashamed too." Sarah left the jail feeling more confused than when she'd entered. Vivian wasn't the monster she'd built in her mind. She was a broken woman who'd broken other people. The distinction mattered, even if Sarah didn't fully understand why yet. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Sarah woke early, helped Rose prepare, and tried not to think about how pale her mother looked, how shallow her breathing had become. The courtroom was packed, media in the back rows, Meadowbrook residents filling the gallery, Emma Ashford sitting alone near the front, her presence a statement Sarah respected even if she didn't fully understand it. Vivian entered in handcuffs, her expensive attorneys flanking her like bodyguards. She looked at Emma once, hope and desperation in her eyes, but Emma's face remained neutral, not forgiving, not condemning, just present. The prosecutor, Patricia Gomez, was a woman in her late 40s with the sharp efficiency of someone who'd spent decades putting criminals away. Her opening was devastating in its simplicity. "Vivian Ashford lost her son 8 years ago. That's tragedy, and we sympathize. But she chose to weaponize her grief. She embezzled from neighbors. She forged government documents. She intimidated witnesses. She committed arson. When caught, she showed no remorse until the consequences became real." The defense attorney, Morton Blake, painted a different picture. A grieving mother, a mentally ill woman who'd found purpose in community service after personal tragedy. Mistakes made, yes, but mistakes born of trauma, not malice. The testimony began with Leonard's documentation. 3 years of systematic abuse laid out with academic precision. The jury wasn't present at a preliminary hearing, but the judge took notes steadily, her face betraying nothing. Margaret testified about her bird feeder, about losing her home, about Vivian profiting from her grief. Patricia spoke about being made to feel foreign in her own neighborhood. Anna described buying a home based on fraudulent assurances, her baby daughter sleeping in her arms as she testified. But it was Rose's testimony that changed the room's energy. Sarah wheeled her mother to the witness stand, helped her get situated, adjusted the microphone. Rose looked tiny in the witness box, dwarfed by the formal trappings of justice. But when she began speaking, her voice carried weight that transcended physical frailty. "Mrs. Chen," the prosecutor began gently, "please tell the court what happened when you discovered the ground lease documents." Rose's hands trembled on the armrests, but her voice was steady. "I was researching family history for a community project. I found my mother's papers in the county archive, a ground lease from 1949, 75 years. I brought copies to the HOA board meeting." What was Ms. Ashford's response? She said the documents were invalid, that her attorneys had confirmed clear title. She said I was confused, that I should focus on my health rather than ancient paperwork. What happened next? 1 week later, I received a violation notice. My bamboo grove, planted by my late husband 43 years ago, was suddenly illegal, wrong species, not on the approved plant list. The prosecutor displayed photos, the bamboo grove in full glory, Thomas Chen planting the original shoots, Rose and Thomas together in the garden. "This bamboo was your husband's legacy?" Rose nodded, tears starting. "Thomas came home from Korea with nightmares and shaking hands. He said bamboo survived everything: war, drought, fire. He said it reminded him of me, that I was his bamboo, strong, flexible, unbreakable." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of people crying. "Did you comply with the violation notice?" "I couldn't afford to. Replacing the bamboo cost $8,000. I live on Social Security. I asked for an exception. Ms. Ashford denied it in writing." The prosecutor showed the denial letter, Vivian's signature clear at the bottom. Then came the cascade of additional violations: garden structures, mailbox color, property line encroachment, each carrying escalating fines. "Within 3 months, you owed how much?" $4,800. "And when you couldn't pay?" "They filed a lien on my house. The house my husband built. The house we'd owned free and clear for over 40 years. "What happened to that house, Mrs. Chen?" Rose's voice broke. "I had a stroke. The stress. I couldn't fight anymore. My daughter had to sell it to pay the medical bills and legal fees. A company called Cascade Properties, LLC, bought it for 60% of market value." The prosecutor pulled up corporate records. "And who owns Cascade Properties?" Silence. Then Rose looked directly at Vivian for the first time. "She does." The defense attorney's cross-examination was gentle, but Rose was ready for it. "Mrs. Chen, you've suffered significant health issues. How can you be certain of Miss Ashford's intent?" Rose met his eyes steadily. "I'm 81. I've had a stroke. Sometimes I forget what I ate for breakfast. But I will never forget Vivian Ashford looking me in the eye and saying, 'Pay or lose everything.' I wrote it down because I'm old, not stupid. I knew people would say I was confused. That's what they always say about elderly women. But your journal, your memory, these could be unreliable." Rose reached into her bag with shaking hands and pulled out a worn notebook. "This is my journal. Every date, every conversation, every fine. I documented everything because I knew no one would believe an old Chinese woman over a white HOA president. My husband taught me to keep records. He faced discrimination his whole life. Documentation, he said, is power when you have none." The defense attorney had no response to that. Sarah testified next, describing finding her mother surrounded by papers she couldn't open. The systematic destruction of Rose's peace, the pattern of targeting vulnerable people. But it was Emma Ashford's testimony that cut deepest. The prosecutor called her reluctantly, knowing a daughter testifying against her mother was powerful but painful. Emma took the stand looking like she might shatter, but her voice was firm. "Ms. Ashford, you provided the flash drive containing your mother's personal files. Why?" Emma looked at Vivian, and Sarah saw love and grief and determination in equal measure. "Because she's my mom and she's sick and she needed help I couldn't give her. She needed someone to stop her before she destroyed herself completely." "What did you find in those files?" Emma's voice shook. "Journal entries planning how to target people, tracking who was vulnerable, documenting how to exploit their weaknesses. My mother, who used to braid my hair and make me laugh, had become someone who hunted people for sport. The defense objected. Inflammatory characterization. The judge overruled. The witness may describe what she observed. Emma continued, tears falling freely now. After Daniel died, Mom became someone I didn't recognize. Control became everything. She pushed away everyone who loved her. Me, Dad, her friends. Until all she had was power over that community. And she'd do anything to keep it. She described finding the journal entries, making the decision to copy the files. I love my mother, but love doesn't mean enabling destruction. I hope someday she gets help, but she needs to face what she's done first. Vivian was crying openly in her seat, her attorneys on either side looking uncomfortable with their client's complete breakdown. The final testimony came from Richard Ashford, Vivian's ex-husband, who'd taken an immunity deal. He described the shell company, the forged documents, the $65,000 that had vanished. Did Miss Ashford know the document was fraudulent? Absolutely. She told me no one checks old records, that by the time anyone realized, it would be too late to matter. Why did you help her? Richard looked at Vivian, and Sarah saw decades of complicated history in that look. Because she asked. Because I was angry at the world after our divorce. Because she paid me. Take your pick. The judge called a recess. Sarah helped Rose to a quiet room, got her water, adjusted her oxygen. You did beautifully, Mama. Rose closed her eyes, exhausted. Is it enough? It's enough, Sarah promised, hoping it was true. When they reconvened, the judge's decision was swift. Probable cause found on all counts. Arson, embezzlement, witness intimidation, forgery, fraud. Vivian would be held without bail pending trial. Flight risk and danger to community. As they led Vivian away, she turned to look at Emma one final time. Please, please, Emma. Emma stood, and for the moment Sarah thought she might go to her mother. Instead, she spoke clearly enough for the courtroom to hear. Get help, Mom. Please get help. Outside the courthouse, the coalition gathered on the steps. Media wanted statements, but Sarah was focused on her mother, who looked like the testimony had drained whatever reserve she had left. Marcus appeared with his truck, helped load Rose's wheelchair, drove them home while Sarah sat in back holding her mother's hand. That night, Rose's health took a sharp turn. The hospice nurse who came for the evening check frowned at her vitals, adjusted medications, and pulled Sarah aside. Her body is shutting down. The stress of testifying accelerated things. We're looking at weeks now, maybe days. You should prepare yourself. Sarah sat with her mother through the night, watching her sleep, listening to the labored breathing, feeling time running out like sand through her fingers. At 3 a.m., Rose woke briefly. Sarah? I'm here, Mama. Did we win? We're winning, Sarah said, wiping tears. The judge ruled in our favor. Rose smiled faintly. Good, that's good. The bamboo? Sarah showed her phone, a photo Marcus had sent, new shoots breaking through the soil where the fire had scorched the earth, growing back already. Thomas was right, Rose whispered. Fire doesn't kill bamboo, just makes it stronger. She slept then, and Sarah sat watching the bamboo grove through the window, seeing it sway in the pre-dawn darkness. Strong, flexible, unbreakable. The community vote happened 3 days later. Diane had organized it with remarkable efficiency. 3 options for the burned community center. Rebuild exactly as before. Rebuild as an open public facility. Don't rebuild at all. Convert the space to parkland. Sarah stood before the gathering, feeling the weight of her mother's declining health, the battle still ahead, the choices that would define what Meadowbrook became. My mother said we're like bamboo, Sarah began. We bend, we survive, we grow back stronger. But bamboo doesn't grow back the same. It grows back better. More shoots, deeper roots. Let's not rebuild what was. Let's build what should be. The vote was decisive. 71% chose option 2, an open public facility, not just for Meadowbrook residents, but for the entire county. Marcus presented the plans that night. A community center with meeting rooms free for any group, a library branch in partnership with the county, a pool with reduced fees for low-income families, and at the center, visible through walls of windows, the bamboo grove with a dedication plaque, the Rose Chen Community Garden, in honor of courage, resilience, and the strength that bends but never breaks. Sarah looked at the plans and felt something that might have been hope. Her mother wouldn't live to see it finished, but she'd live to know it was happening. That night, Sarah sat with Rose in the bamboo grove one last time. Her mother was barely conscious now, drifting in and out of lucidity, but Sarah talked anyway. They're naming it after you, Mama. The community center. Your name, your garden, your bamboo. Rose's eyes opened, clear for just a moment. Thomas would love that. He would, Sarah agreed, crying. He'd be so proud of you. Of us, Rose corrected weakly. We did this together, you and me, bamboo women. Sarah held her mother's hand, feeling the pulse growing fainter, knowing their time was measured in hours now, not days, but knowing too that what they'd built together would outlast both of them. The bamboo swayed overhead, 15 feet of strength and flexibility and survival. It had witnessed Thomas planting the first shoots 43 years ago. It had watched Sarah play there as a child. It had survived Vivian's attempt to destroy it, and it would still be growing long after everyone in this story was gone. That was the point, Sarah understood finally. Legacy wasn't about never dying. It was about planting something that survived you. Rose Chen had planted bamboo, and Sarah was learning to be bamboo too, to bend in storms, to root deep, to grow in groves where other women supported each other. The preliminary hearing was over. The trial would come. Justice would be served or it wouldn't. But sitting in this grove with her dying mother, Sarah understood that they'd already won the only battle that truly mattered. They'd refused to break. And in refusing, they'd shown an entire community what strength really meant. Not rigidity, not control, but the courage to bend and keep growing anyway. The bamboo knew. It had always known. And now, finally, so did Sarah. She was bamboo, her mother was bamboo, and together, they were unstoppable. The trial began on a Monday morning in late October, 6 weeks after the preliminary hearing and 3 weeks after Rose had stopped eating solid food. Sarah sat in the front row of the courtroom with her mother in a wheelchair beside her, oxygen tank hissing softly, hospice nurse stationed discreetly in the back. The doctors had said Rose had days, maybe a week if she was strong. But Rose had insisted on being present for the opening statements, had marshaled whatever reserves she had left for this final battle. I need to see it through, she told Sarah that morning, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to know justice came. The courtroom was smaller than the preliminary hearing venue, more intimate, which somehow made everything feel more intense. 12 jurors sat in the box, their faces carefully neutral. 7 women, 5 men, ages ranging from mid-20s to late 70s. Sarah had watched jury selection with Rothman, had learned to read the subtle signals of who might sympathize with an elderly victim versus who might see Vivian as a grieving mother deserving compassion. The demographics told a story. 3 of the women were over 60, 2 had mentioned elderly parents in voir dire. The men were split, some clearly uncomfortable with the idea of a woman being the villain, others harder to read. Vivian entered in a dark blue suit her attorneys had clearly chosen to make her look professional and subdued rather than threatening. She'd lost weight in jail, looked older, more vulnerable. Sarah recognized the strategy. Make the jury see a broken woman, not a criminal. Prosecutor Patricia Gomez rose for opening statements, and her first move surprised everyone. She walked directly to Rose's wheelchair and stood beside it. This is Rose Chen, 81 years old, widow, immigrant, American citizen for 62 years. Mother, grandmother in spirit, if not in fact. She survived the Cultural Revolution. She survived building a life from nothing. She survived her husband's death. What she could not survive was Vivian Ashford's systematic cruelty. Gomez let that settle, then turned to face the jury. This case is about power and what happens when someone mistakes control for protection. After Vivian Ashford lost her son Daniel in a tragic accident 8 years ago, she transformed grief into tyranny. She didn't just run an HOA, she weaponized it. She targeted the vulnerable. She stole from her neighbors. She forged government documents. And when her lies caught up with her, she burned the evidence. The opening was devastating in its clarity. No legal jargon, no complicated explanations, just a simple narrative. Grief, power, abuse, consequences. Defense attorney Morton Blake had a harder job, and he knew it. His opening focused on mental illness, on a woman broken by loss, on mistakes made in the fog of trauma rather than with criminal intent. Vivian Ashford is not a monster. She's a mother who lost everything: her son Daniel, her marriage, her sense of safety in a dangerous world. She found purpose in creating order, in protecting her community. Yes, she made terrible mistakes, but those mistakes came from a place of profound brokenness, not malice. Sarah watched the jury. Some were nodding slightly. Others looked skeptical. The older women, she noticed, were stone-faced. They'd lived long enough to know that trauma didn't excuse cruelty. The first week of testimony was methodical. Gomez built her case brick by brick, document by document. County records showing the ground lease, expert testimony about property law, title company representatives explaining how the forged satisfaction document had deceived them. Leonard took the stand on day 3, and his 3 years of documentation became a weapon of precision. He walked the jury through each family Vivian had targeted, each manufactured violation, each foreclosure threat. The pattern was undeniable: vulnerable people, systematic abuse, shell companies buying distressed properties. The defense tried to paint Leonard as obsessed, as a man with too much time and a vendetta. But Leonard's calm academic demeanor made that impossible. He wasn't emotional, he was factual. And facts didn't care about narrative. On day 4, Margaret Sullivan testified. She brought photos of her late husband building the bird feeder, hospital records showing his final weeks, the violation notice Vivian had sent 3 days after his funeral. "He built that feeder when he could barely stand," Margaret said, her voice steady despite the tears. "He said he wanted the birds to remember him after he was gone." Vivian called it a pest attractant. She fined me $800. When I buried my husband, I was also burying my ability to keep our home. The defense's cross-examination tried to suggest Margaret's memory was clouded by grief. It backfired spectacularly. "Mr. Blake, I remember every detail of my husband's death. I remember the exact time he took his last breath. I remember what the hospice nurse said. I remember the sound of the bird feeder in the wind at his funeral. Grief doesn't make you forget the important things. It makes you remember them forever." 2 jurors were crying. The defense moved on quickly. Patricia Okoye's testimony came on day 5, and she brought something unexpected: a letter from her mother in Nigeria, written in careful English, describing the traditional gardens of their homeland and what they meant to family identity. "My mother is 89 years old," Patricia said. "She taught me to plant okra and peppers in bitter leaf the way her mother taught her. When I planted those same vegetables in my American garden, I was honoring 5 generations of women." Vivian Ashford called it ethnic and inappropriate. She tried to find my heritage out of existence. The jury learned that Patricia had taught American history for 30 years, had received county recognition for excellence in education, had served on multiple civic boards, and still Vivian had made her feel foreign in her own home. Ana Morales testified on day 6, her infant daughter Rosa sleeping in her arms. She presented emails, title documents, mortgage applications. Every piece of paper showed Vivian's explicit assurance that the HOA owned all common land free and clear. "We trusted her," Anna said simply. "She was the president. She looked us in the eye and lied. Now our mortgage company is threatening to call our loan. We could lose everything because she prioritized power over truth." But it was Diane Fletcher's testimony that cut through the courtroom like a knife. The defense tried to keep her off the stand, arguing her testimony was prejudicial, but the judge allowed it. Diane had been part of Vivian's system. Her testimony showed how that system worked from the inside. "She made me complicit," Diane said, her voice shaking. "My son has cerebral palsy. Water therapy is the only thing that gives him relief. Vivian knew that. She told me if I didn't enforce her violations, my son couldn't use the pool anymore. So I did. I fined Margaret for her bird feeder. I cited Patricia for her garden. I became a bully to protect my child." The prosecutor asked the question everyone needed answered: "How did that make you feel?" "Like I was selling my soul." But when you're desperate, when your child is suffering, you'll do things you never thought possible. Vivian understood that. She exploited it. The defense tried to suggest Diane had been a willing participant, not a victim. But Diane was ready. "Mr. Blake, have you ever watched your child in pain and been unable to help? Have you ever been told the one thing that gives them relief will be taken away unless you hurt other people? That's not participation, that's coercion." The courtroom was silent after that. Week 2 brought the financial evidence, and it was damning. Forensic accountants traced every dollar of the $65,000 Vivian had withdrawn. Shell company formations, wire transfers, the money flowing from HOA reserves to Ashford Consulting to Richard Ashford, to accounts in the Cayman Islands where the trail went cold. The defense argued it was a legitimate legal expense, that Vivian had been trying to purchase the land from developers to protect the community. But the forensic accountant's testimony destroyed that narrative. There's no evidence of any negotiation with developers. No letters, no offers, no counteroffers. The money simply vanished into offshore accounts, controlled by Ms. Ashford's ex-husband. Richard Ashford himself took the stand on day 8, and his testimony was brutal. He described the phone call from Vivian in late 2021, the request to create a consulting company, the promise of easy money for minimal work. She told me she needed to buy the land before the lease expired. She said the HOA would pay for consulting services. I took $20,000 as a fee and gave her the rest. She used it trying to negotiate. When the developers refused, she asked me to forge the satisfaction document. Why did you agree to commit forgery? Richard looked at Vivian across the courtroom. Because she asked. Because I was broke and bitter after our divorce. Because she said no one would ever check records that old. I knew it was illegal. I did it anyway. The defense tried to suggest Richard was lying to save himself, that his immunity deal made him an unreliable witness. But the documentary evidence backed up every word. Computer records showed him accessing the county filing system. Digital signatures matched. The timeline was perfect. On day 9, the prosecution called its surprise witness. Emma Ashford walked to the stand looking like she might shatter, and the courtroom collectively held its breath. A daughter testifying against her mother was theater of the cruelest kind. Gomez's questions were gentle, but the answers were devastating. Emma described life after Daniel's death, watching her mother transform from strict but loving into someone obsessed with control, the rules that multiplied, the friends who were suddenly inappropriate, the constant surveillance masked as concern. When did you realize your mother needed help? Emma's voice broke. When I found her journal entries planning how to target Rose Chen. My mother wrote things like elderly, alone, vulnerable, limited resources, easy to break. She was hunting people. The woman who used to braid my hair was hunting people. The jury saw the journal entries projected on screens. Vivian's handwriting, Vivian's words, clinical, cold, calculating. Why did you give these files to the prosecution? Emma looked at her mother, tears streaming down her face. Because I love her. And when you love someone who's destroying themselves, you don't enable them. You try to save them, even if they hate you for it. The defense's cross-examination was careful, knowing that attacking a grieving daughter would alienate the jury. Blake tried to suggest Emma misunderstood her mother's intentions, that the journal entries were therapeutic processing, not criminal planning. Emma's response was quiet but firm. My brother Daniel believed in doing the right thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Testifying against my mother is the hardest thing I've ever done. But it's right, and I think Danny would understand that. Several jurors were crying openly now. The prosecution saved Rose for last, and Sarah spent the night before her mother's testimony terrified that Rose wouldn't survive it. The hospice nurse adjusted pain medications, trying to find the balance between keeping Rose comfortable and keeping her lucid enough to testify. "Mama, you don't have to do this," Sarah said at midnight, watching her mother struggle for each breath. Rose's eyes opened, still fierce despite the body's failure. "Yes, I do. I need her to know she didn't win. I need everyone to know that old women matter." The morning of Rose's testimony, Sarah helped her mother dress in the traditional Chinese jacket Thomas had bought her for their 50th anniversary. It hung loose on Rose's diminished frame, but the deep red color brought some life to her gray complexion. Sarah braided her mother's white hair with shaking hands, remembering all the times Rose had braided hers as a child. "You're so strong, Mama." Rose touched Sarah's face with trembling fingers. "We're strong. Together. Bamboo." The courtroom went silent when Sarah wheeled Rose to the witness stand. The judge ordered a special chair brought so Rose could testify from her wheelchair. The oxygen tank sat beside her, its rhythmic hiss the only sound as the bailiff administered the oath. Rose raised her right hand, voice barely audible. I do. Gomez approached with visible gentleness. Mrs. Chen, I know this is difficult. We'll take breaks whenever you need. Rose shook her head slightly. No breaks. I have things to say. The testimony began with Rose's history. Coming to America at 19, meeting Thomas Chen at a church social, building a life from nothing, buying the land, planting the bamboo grove the day Sarah was born. Why bamboo, Mrs. Chen? Rose's voice strengthened slightly. Thomas came home from Korea with nightmares. He said bamboo survived everything in the war. Bombs, fire, flooding. It bent, but never broke. He said I was like that, strong because I could bend. We planted it together. 43 years it grew. Gomez showed photos. The bamboo grove in full glory. Thomas and Rose working the soil. Young Sarah playing among the stalks. What happened when you found the ground lease documents? I brought them to the HOA board meeting. I thought people should know the truth. Vivian said I was confused. Said her lawyers confirmed we own nothing. She dismissed me in front of everyone like I was a senile old woman making things up. What happened next? Rose's hands gripped the armrests. 1 week later, violation notice. My bamboo was suddenly illegal. Wrong species, not approved, $8,000 to remove it all and replant. I live on Social Security, $800 a month. Where would I get $8,000? Did you ask for an exception? I begged. I showed her photos of Thomas planting it, told her it was his memorial. She said rules exist for everyone, no exceptions. The prosecutor displayed the denial letter, Vivian's signature cold and formal at the bottom. When you couldn't pay, what happened? More violations. Garden bench unapproved, mailbox wrong color, property line wrong. Every week, new fines. I stopped going outside, stopped checking mail. I was afraid to live in my own home. Rose's breathing became labored. The judge asked if she needed a break. Rose refused. Then the stroke. I woke up in the hospital. Sarah was there. She told me they were foreclosing. I had to sell. 43 years in that house. Thomas built our life there. And I lost it in 3 months because I told the truth. Who bought your house, Mrs. Chen? Cascade Properties, LLC. Rose looked directly at Vivian. Her company. She drove me out and bought my home for pennies. Now she rents it for profit. My grief became her income. The jury was riveted. This wasn't legal theory. This was an 81-year-old widow describing systematic destruction. Gomez's final question landed like a hammer. Mrs. Chen, what would you like this jury to know? Rose took a slow breath, gathering strength. I'm dying. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, but I'm dying. And before I go, I want everyone to know that old people matter. Immigrant women matter. We're not confused. We're not senile. We're human beings who deserve dignity. Vivian Ashford tried to erase me, but I'm still here. And the truth is still true. The standing ovation started in the gallery and spread despite the judge's gavel. Rose sat in her wheelchair, tears streaming down her face, Sarah holding her hand. And for those 30 seconds, the courtroom acknowledged something bigger than a trial. They acknowledged that Rose Chen had survived. The defense's cross-examination was the gentlest Sarah had ever seen in a courtroom. Blake knew that attacking Rose would destroy any sympathy the jury had for Vivian. Mrs. Chen, we're all sorry for your suffering. Could this have been a misunderstanding rather than intentional cruelty? Rose looked at him with eyes that had seen too much to be fooled. Mr. Blake, she came to my house. She told me if I mentioned the lease again, I would regret it. There's no misunderstanding in a threat. Could your memory be affected by your illness? My body is failing. My mind sometimes wanders, but I wrote everything down when I was clear. My journal doesn't forget. The county records don't forget. And this courtroom won't forget. Blake had no more questions. The defense case began the next day, and it focused entirely on Vivian's mental state. Psychiatrists testified about complicated grief disorder, about trauma responses, about how losing a child could create obsessive need for control. One expert, a doctor who'd evaluated Vivian in jail, described her as genuinely remorseful, as someone whose capacity for rational decision-making had been impaired by untreated mental illness. But on cross-examination, Gomez was merciless. Doctor, does mental illness prevent someone from knowing that embezzlement is wrong? No, but it can impair judgment about... Simple question. Did Ms. Ashford know stealing $65,000 was illegal? The psychiatrist hesitated. Yes. Did she know forging government documents was illegal? Yes. Did she know intimidating witnesses was illegal? Yes, but thank you, doctor. No further questions. Vivian took the stand on day 12, against her attorney's advice. Sarah watched her walk to the witness box and saw someone completely different from the polished HOA president. This Vivian was raw, broken, desperately trying to explain the inexplicable. Blake led her through Daniel's death, through the trial where his killer got house arrest, through the descent into need for control that followed. I couldn't save Danny, Vivian said, voice breaking. But I thought if I could keep everything else perfect, if I could prevent any chaos, maybe I could prevent another tragedy. The HOA became my purpose. Rules became safety. And anyone who threatened that threatened everything. When you targeted Rose Chen, what were you thinking? I wasn't thinking. I was reacting. She found documents that proved I'd been lying. She was going to destroy the community I'd built. So I destroyed her first, and I hate myself for it. The courtroom was silent. This was honest, raw confession. But Gomez's cross-examination exposed the calculation beneath the emotion. Ms. Ashford, you say you weren't thinking, but you created shell companies to hide your property purchases. That requires planning. I was trying to protect. You forged government documents with your ex-husband's help. That requires coordination. I thought I could fix. You withdrew $65,000 and funneled it offshore. That requires deliberation. Vivian's composure cracked. I don't know. I don't know why I did those things. I was broken and I broke people and I'm sorry. Being sorry doesn't undo the harm. I know, Vivian whispered. I know. The closing arguments took a full day. Blake painted Vivian as a victim of her own trauma, deserving of compassion and treatment rather than punishment. Gomez painted her as a criminal who'd weaponized her grief, who'd targeted the vulnerable, who'd show no remorse until consequences became real. When you're deciding this case, Gomez told the jury, remember Rose Chen, remember Margaret Sullivan, remember Patricia Okoye, remember Ana Morales, and every other person Vivian Ashford hurt. Mental illness explains behavior. It doesn't excuse it. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Sarah spent that time at the hospital with Rose, whose condition had deteriorated sharply after testifying. The hospice nurse said it was a matter of hours now, maybe a day. But Rose hung on, as if she knew the verdict was coming and needed to hear it. When Sarah's phone rang at 4 p.m., she saw Rothman's name and felt her heart stop. Verdict's in, they're coming back. Sarah looked at her mother, unconscious now, breathing shallow. Can it wait? Rose's eyes opened, clear for one impossible moment. Go. I need to know. Sarah made it to the courtroom in 20 minutes, running red lights, her hands shaking on the wheel. She slid into her seat just as the jury filed in, their faces unreadable. The foreman stood, a woman in her 60s who'd mentioned caring for her own elderly mother during voir dire. On the charge of arson in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of embezzlement? Guilty. On the charge of witness intimidation of Rose Chen? Guilty. On the charge of witness intimidation of Margaret Sullivan? Guilty. On the charge of forgery of government records? Guilty. On the charges of fraud, counts 1 through 9? Guilty on 7 counts. Vivian collapsed. Her attorneys caught her, helped her to a chair. Emma, sitting alone in the gallery, put her head in her hands and sobbed. Sarah sat perfectly still, feeling the weight of justice delivered but finding no joy in it. Just exhaustion. Just relief. Just the need to get back to her mother. She called Rose's hospice nurse from the courthouse steps. Tell her we won. Tell her justice came. The nurse's voice was gentle. She knows, Sarah. Somehow she knows. She smiled when the clock hit 4, like she felt it. Sentencing was scheduled for 30 days later, but Sarah knew her mother wouldn't live to see it. Rose held on for 3 more days, lucid for brief moments, sleeping most of the time, her body finally surrendering to the strain it had endured. On the morning of the 3rd day, Sarah sat holding her mother's hand in the bedroom where Rose had slept for 43 years. The bamboo grove was visible through the window, swaying in the October breeze. Rose's eyes opened one last time. Sarah? I'm here, Mama. We won? We won, justice came. You did it. Rose smiled, the expression peaceful and complete. Thomas would be proud. Of you. Of everything. I learned from the best. Be bamboo, Baobi. Always be bamboo. Those were Rose Chen's last words. She closed her eyes and slipped away so gently that Sarah almost didn't realize she was gone. No struggle, no pain, just peace. She'd held on long enough to know that justice had come, and then she'd let go. Sarah sat with her mother's body for an hour before calling anyone, watching the bamboo sway, feeling the grief settle into her bones. But beneath the grief was something else: pride, gratitude, the knowledge that Rose Chen had lived and died on her own terms. They'd tried to erase her, and she'd refused. She'd fought. She'd testified. She'd survived long enough to see Vivian Ashford convicted. That was victory, that was justice, that was bamboo. Sarah finally called the hospice nurse, then Marcus, then the coalition. Within hours, Rose's house filled with women bringing food and flowers and tears. They sat in the bamboo grove, these women Rose had inspired, and told stories about courage and resilience and survival. The funeral would come, the sentencing would come, the rebuilding would come. But right now, Sarah just sat in her mother's garden and understood finally what Thomas had meant when he planted bamboo 43 years ago. Some things bend but never break. Some things survive everything. Some things grow back stronger every time you try to cut them down. Rose Chen was bamboo, and her legacy would keep growing long after everyone in this story was gone. That was justice. That was love. That was the lesson Sarah would carry forward. Be bamboo. Always be bamboo. And in bending, survive. The funeral happened on a Saturday morning when the October sky was the kind of blue that made you believe in heaven, even if you'd stopped believing years ago. Sarah stood at the entrance to the county memorial chapel and watched 500 people arrive to honor a woman who died with almost no money, no house of her own, and a body ravaged by stress and illness. But Rose Chen had left something more valuable than wealth. She'd left proof that one person standing up could change everything. The chapel filled beyond capacity. People lined the walls, stood in doorways, crowded the hallway outside. Sarah recognized Meadowbrook residents, but there were so many others. Former students of Patricia's who'd heard the story. ER patients Sarah had treated over 20 years who wanted to pay respects. County officials, media, and dozens of elderly women Sarah had never met, who'd seen Rose's testimony online and understood that someone had finally fought for them. Marcus had helped arrange everything, working quietly in the background the way he always did. The service blended Buddhist traditions with American customs, honoring both sides of Rose's identity. A monk from Portland chanted prayers in Mandarin. A pastor from the church Thomas had attended spoke about faith and resilience. And one by one, the people Rose had touched stood to remember her. Leonard spoke first, his academic voice carrying unexpected emotion. Rose Chen taught me that documentation isn't just record keeping, it's resistance. Every time she wrote down a violation notice, every time she photographed her bamboo grove, she was saying, I was here. I mattered. What happened to me was real. In an age that erases the elderly and dismisses immigrants, Rose Chen refused to be erased. Margaret stood next, leaning on a cane, her voice shaking. I met Rose 30 years ago at a garden club meeting. She brought bamboo shoots to share, said Thomas told her bamboo survived everything. I didn't understand then. I thought she was just talking about plants. But Rose was teaching us about survival, about bending in storms, about growing back stronger. She lived what she taught. And because she did, I'm still in my home. We all are. Patricia spoke about heritage and dignity. Rose could have been bitter about the racism she faced, about being dismissed as a confused old Chinese woman. Instead, she documented everything with precision that would shame any historian. She turned their contempt into evidence. She made them see her. That's power. Ana Morales held baby Rosa, named after the woman who'd saved their home. This is my daughter. She'll grow up knowing Rose Chen's story. She'll know that one grandmother with arthritis and an oxygen tank brought down an empire of lies. She'll know that you don't need wealth or power to change the world. You just need truth and courage. Diane Fletcher spoke through tears about redemption. Rose could have hated me. I enforced Vivian's rules. I fined people. I was complicit. But when I finally found the courage to speak up, Rose didn't judge me. She said everyone deserves a chance to do better. She gave me that chance. I'll spend my life trying to earn it. But it was Emma Ashford's eulogy that made Sarah cry. Emma walked to the podium looking fragile but determined, and half the room tensed. uncertain what the daughter of Rose's destroyer would say. "I didn't know Rose Chen well," Emma began, her voice barely steady, "but she showed me something I desperately needed to see. She showed me what my mother could have been if grief hadn't consumed her. Rose lost her husband. She could have become bitter, controlling, cruel. Instead, she became a gardener. She planted. She nurtured. She grew beauty." Emma's tears fell freely now. "My mother lost my brother and became a destroyer. Rose lost Thomas and became a creator. The difference is a choice. And Rose chose grace every single day. I'm sorry my family caused her so much pain. I promise to honor her by choosing differently, by planting instead of destroying, by bending instead of breaking." The standing ovation lasted a full minute. Sarah spoke last, and she kept it simple because complicated words felt wrong for someone who'd lived with such clarity. "My mother survived war, immigration, widowhood, and Vivian Ashford. She survived because she was bamboo, flexible, rooted, unbreakable. She taught me that strength isn't rigidity. It's the ability to bend without breaking, to root deep, to grow in groves where other people support you." Sarah looked out at the 500 people filling the chapel. "Mama, you wanted to know if old people matter, if immigrant women matter. Look around. You have your answer." They buried Rose next to Thomas in the county cemetery, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Sarah planted bamboo shoots around the grave, the same variety Thomas had planted 43 years ago. In the wind, they swayed like they were welcoming Rose home. The sentencing happened 2 weeks later, and Sarah attended because Rose would have wanted someone there to witness justice completed. The courtroom was less crowded than the trial, but the coalition came. Margaret, Patricia, Diane, Anna with baby Rosa, Leonard with his documentation, Marcus in the back, steady and quiet. Vivian entered looking smaller than Sarah remembered, her jail jumpsuit hanging loose, her face aged beyond the weeks that had passed. Emma sat in the front row, and when Vivian saw her daughter, something broke in her expression. Hope and shame in equal measure. Judge Catherine Reeves was a woman in her late 50s who'd spent 30 years on the bench and had the weathered look of someone who'd seen every variety of human failure. She read through victim impact statements first, and Sarah listened to her own words spoken aloud. "My mother is dead. Vivian Ashford's actions contributed to the stress that killed her. No sentence changes that. But my mother's last words to me were, 'Be bamboo.' She meant be flexible enough to bend, strong enough to survive, gracious enough to hope for redemption. I don't forgive Vivian Ashford. Forgiveness isn't mine to give on my mother's behalf. But I support a sentence that includes genuine treatment and the possibility of healing. My mother believed in bamboo. She believed things could grow back stronger after being cut down. I choose to believe that too." Emma's statement followed, and her words carried the weight of a daughter trying to save a mother who'd lost herself. "My mother is mentally ill. She needs treatment, not just punishment. But she also needs to face what she's done. For years, I watched her hurt people and justify it as protection. That ends now. I love my mother. I always will. But I support this court holding her accountable. It's the only path to the help she truly needs." Then Vivian was given a chance to speak. She stood slowly, shaking, and Sarah saw genuine remorse in her face. Not the calculated performance of someone trying to reduce a sentence, but raw recognition of harm done. "I have no excuse," Vivian began, her voice barely audible. "I lost my son. That broke me. I know that now. I've been in treatment here in jail, therapy, medication. And for the first time since Daniel died, I can see clearly. What I see horrifies me." She looked directly at the gallery, at the faces of people she'd hurt. "I destroyed Rose Chen because she threatened my control. I targeted Margaret. I targeted Patricia. I targeted everyone who made me feel like I wasn't in absolute power. And I told myself it was protection, but it was tyranny." Vivian's voice broke completely. "Rose Chen is dead. I contributed to that. I will carry it forever. To all the families I hurt, I'm sorry. To Emma, I'm sorry I became a monster. I hope someday you can forgive me." The judge let silence settle before speaking. "Ms. Ashford, you held a position of trust. You betrayed that trust systematically and deliberately. Your mental illness explains your actions. It does not excuse them. However, I also see genuine remorse. I see treatment beginning to work. I see a woman starting to understand the harm she caused. Judge Reeves consulted her notes. Therefore, on the charge of arson in the first degree, I sentence you to 8 years in state prison. On the charge of embezzlement, 4 years to run concurrently. On witness intimidation charges, 2 years each, concurrent. On forgery of government records, 3 years concurrent. On fraud charges, 1 year each, concurrent. Total sentence, 8 years, eligible for parole after 5 with good behavior and continued mental health treatment. The judge continued. Additionally, you will pay restitution, $65,000 to the HOA for embezzlement, $180,000 to Rose Chen's estate for home value difference, medical costs, and pain and suffering, $40,000 distributed among other victims. And finally, as a condition of your sentence and any potential parole, you will continue intensive mental health treatment. You will have no contact with victims unless they explicitly consent. Upon release, you will serve 5 years probation with mandatory therapy. Judge Reeves looked at Vivian directly. This court hopes you find redemption, Ms. Ashford. But first, you must serve your debt to society and to your victims. Court is adjourned. They led Vivian away in handcuffs. As she passed Emma, she whispered something Sarah couldn't hear. Emma nodded once. Not quite forgiveness, but not quite rejection either. A daughter acknowledging a mother's humanity while refusing to enable her destruction. Outside the courthouse, the coalition gathered on the steps. Diane spoke first, her voice firm despite tears. It's done. Justice came. Now we rebuild. Sarah looked at these women who'd become family, who'd found strength in each other when isolation had kept them powerless. We're not just rebuilding the community center, we're building something bigger. That night, Sarah made a decision that had been forming for weeks. She called her supervisor at the ER and made her leave of absence permanent. 20 years of emergency medicine had given her skills in crisis management, in keeping calm under pressure, in saving lives. But her mother's fight had shown her a different kind of emergency, the slow-motion crisis of elderly people being systematically erased. She had work to do. The Bamboo Collective formed officially 3 months after Rose's death. Sarah, Margaret, Patricia, Diane, and Anna as founding members. Leonard as advisor. Marcus providing legal and financial support. Their mission was simple: support women facing HOA abuse, elder abuse, caregiver stress. They started small. A free legal clinic run by pro bono attorneys from Rothman's firm. Caregiver support groups that Sarah facilitated, drawing on her own experience of watching her mother decline. Documentation training sessions where Patricia taught people to preserve evidence the way Leonard had. Their first major victory came 4 months in. An elderly widow in neighboring Harper County faced foreclosure over a garden gnome her late husband had carved. The HOA president was demanding $1,500 in fines. The widow lived on Social Security and couldn't afford a lawyer. The Bamboo Collective took her case. Patricia documented the pattern of violations. Margaret organized community support. Diane contacted media. And Sarah sat with the widow, this 84-year-old woman who reminded her so much of Rose, and promised she wasn't alone. The Harper County HOA president resigned within 2 weeks. The fines were rescinded. The widow kept her gnome and her home. One down, Sarah told the coalition at their next meeting. How many more out there? Leonard had statistics. Based on his research, approximately 12% of HOA residents over 70 face some form of systematic targeting. Thousands of vulnerable people across Oregon alone. We've got work to do, Diane said simply. The groundbreaking for the Rose Chen Community Center happened on a spring morning 6 months after Rose's death. Sarah stood in the bamboo grove, now protected by county ordinance as a historical landmark, and watched Marcus present the final architectural plans. The design was beautiful, walls of windows facing the bamboo, meeting rooms named after the women Vivian had targeted, a library branch in partnership with the county, a pool with reduced fees for low-income families, and at the center, a garden classroom with Rose and Thomas's photo prominently displayed. The sign at the entrance would read, Rose Chen Community Center, in honor of courage, resilience, and the strength that bends but never breaks. The construction took 18 months. Sarah visited the site weekly, watching walls rise, watching the bamboo grove become the centerpiece, rather than something to hide. Marcus had designed it so every room had a view of those swaying stalks, a constant reminder of what the building represented. During construction, Sarah wrote a memoir. She hadn't planned to, but a Portland publisher had contacted her after seeing Rose's testimony online. The book practically wrote itself, pouring out of Sarah in the quiet hours after her shifts facilitating support groups. She called it Bamboo Daughter, One Woman's Fight for Justice, Memory, and Peace. The dedication was simple. For Rose Chen, who taught me to bend. For Thomas Chen, who planted the first bamboo. For every daughter who fights for her mother. The book was published 9 months after Rose's death and became a regional bestseller. Sarah donated all proceeds to the Rose Chen Scholarship Fund, established for young people advocating for elderly rights. 15 months after sentencing, Sarah received a letter from the Oregon State Women's Correctional Facility. Vivian's handwriting on the envelope made her stomach tighten, but she opened it anyway. The letter was 6 pages, handwritten carefully, and it showed a woman genuinely trying to change. "Dear Sarah," it began, "I don't deserve your attention, but my therapist says writing this is part of my recovery, so I am. I'm in a women's prison in Eastern Oregon. It's harsh, it's frightening, and it's where I belong. I've been in intensive therapy for over a year now. EMDR for Daniel's death, cognitive behavioral therapy for my control issues, medication for anxiety and obsessive thoughts. For the first time since Daniel died, I'm beginning to see clearly. And what I see horrifies me. I destroyed your mother. I destroyed families. I destroyed my relationship with Emma. All because I thought control could prevent loss. But you can't control death. You can't protect people by imprisoning them. I know that now. Too late for Rose. Maybe not too late for me. Your mother is dead because of the stress I caused. I know that. I carry it every day. But I want you to know she won. Not just legally, morally. She showed me what strength really looks like. Flexibility, grace, resilience. I'm trying to be Bamboo now. I teach literacy to other inmates. I garden in the prison yard. We planted bamboo there, and I water it every day. It reminds me of your mother's grove. I tend it. And I remember what I destroyed and what I'm trying to rebuild. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know I'm trying to become someone Daniel would recognize, someone Emma might someday speak to again." The letter ended with something Sarah hadn't expected. "Thank you for visiting me before the trial. You didn't have to, but you did. That kindness, shown to someone who'd hurt you so much, planted something in me. It's growing slowly, but it's growing." Sarah showed the letter to Emma during one of their now regular coffee meetings. Emma had become an unexpected friend, bonded by the strange intimacy of shared trauma. "What do you think?" Sarah asked. Emma read carefully, tears forming. "She's trying. That's my mom in there somewhere, the real one, buried under 8 years of grief, but still there. Are you going to respond?" Emma nodded slowly. "Not to forgive, not yet, but to acknowledge she's trying. That matters." The Rose Chen Community Center opened 2 years after Rose's death on a brilliant Saturday in May. Over 800 people attended the ribbon cutting, county officials, state representatives, the entire Meadowbrook community. Women the Bamboo Collective had helped from 6 different counties, and media from across the state. Sarah stood at the podium looking out at the crowd, at the bamboo grove swaying behind the building's glass walls, at the legacy her mother had left. "My mother died 2 years ago today," Sarah began. "She died knowing justice had come. But she didn't live to see this. This building, this community, this transformation from a place of fear to a place of hope." She gestured to the bamboo visible through the windows. "My father planted that bamboo 43 years ago. He said it survived everything, war, fire, drought. He said it reminded him of my mother, strong because she could bend. Vivian Ashford tried to cut it down. She failed. Bamboo doesn't die when you cut it. It grows back stronger. More shoots, deeper roots impossible to eliminate." Sarah's voice strengthened. This center isn't just a building, it's proof that when vulnerable people stand together, when women support women, when communities choose inclusion over exclusion, we become unstoppable. We become bamboo. The crowd erupted in applause. Sophia Morales, now 7 years old, received the first Rose Chen Scholarship. She'd written an essay about courage that made half the audience cry. When Vivian tried to take our house, my mom says Rose Chen saved us. Now I want to help other grandmas like Rose, because old people are important. Out of the mouths of children came truth that adults often forgot. The Bamboo Collective had grown beyond anyone's expectations. By the center's opening, they were helping 47 women across Oregon fight various forms of systemic abuse. Their documentation training had become a model program. Their legal clinic had a 6-month waiting list. But more importantly, they'd created a network. Women who'd been isolated finding community, caregivers who'd been struggling alone finding support, elderly people who'd been dismissed finding advocates. Margaret led a memorial garden committee. Patricia taught workshops on preserving cultural heritage. Diane ran the governance transparency program. Anna coordinated family services. And Sarah, who'd thought she'd left healing behind when she quit the ER, discovered she'd simply found a different kind of medicine. 18 months into Vivian's sentence, Sarah received a call from the Oregon Department of Corrections. Vivian was eligible for early release to a transitional facility based on exceptional behavior, mental health progress, and prison overcrowding. Victims had the right to object or support. The coalition split again on the question. Some wanted Vivian to serve her full sentence. Others felt rehabilitation was working, and further incarceration served no purpose. Sarah wrestled with the decision for weeks. Finally, she called Emma. "What does your heart tell you?" Sarah asked. Emma was quiet for a long moment. That my mother is finally getting help. That keeping her in prison longer won't heal anyone. That maybe Daniel would want her to have a chance. The victim impact hearing happened on a cold morning in November. Sarah stood before the parole board and spoke words she'd carefully prepared. Rose Chen is dead. Vivian Ashford's actions contributed to the stress that killed her. No early release changes that. But my mother's last words to me were, "Be bamboo." She meant be flexible enough to hope for redemption while being strong enough to demand accountability. Sarah took a breath. "I don't forgive Vivian Ashford, but I support her release under strict conditions. She's engaged in genuine treatment. She's shown real remorse. Keeping her in prison serves punishment, not restoration." My mother believed things could grow back stronger. I choose to believe that too. But, Sarah's voice hardened, if she violates any condition, I will advocate for maximum penalties. This is a chance, not absolution. The board granted conditional release. Vivian would serve the remainder of her sentence in a transitional facility, then supervise community placement. Conditions were strict. No contact with Meadowbrook residents except Emma. Continued intensive therapy. Restitution payments from any future income. Community service at women's shelters. Zero tolerance for violations. Vivian was released to the transitional facility 3 weeks later. Sarah didn't attend, but Emma did, and she reported back that her mother had cried seeing sky that wasn't framed by prison bars. She asked about Meadowbrook, Emma said quietly, about the community center, about the bamboo. I told her about everything. She cried the whole time. 2 years became 3, then 4, then 5. Sarah watched Meadowbrook transform from a place ruled by fear into something that felt like actual community. The rigid beige conformity gave way to color. Gardens bloomed in varieties Vivian would have banned. Children played freely. Dogs ran in the park. The Bamboo Collective had helped over 200 women by year 5. Their model had been adopted by advocacy groups in 3 other states. Sarah had testified before the Oregon legislature about HOA reform, leading to new laws protecting vulnerable residents. And Sarah herself had transformed. At 52, she'd found purpose that had eluded her through 2 decades of emergency medicine. She dated occasionally but stayed happily single, her life full of meaningful work and chosen family. Marcus had remarried to a kind librarian named Lillian who worked at the community center. They'd become Sarah's closest friends, the 3 of them having dinner weekly, laughing about the strange journey that had brought them together. Emma visited her mother monthly, a slow reconciliation built on honesty rather than obligation. Vivian worked at a women's crisis center in Eugene, helping abuse survivors navigate legal systems. She sent restitution payments faithfully. She attended therapy religiously. And slowly, carefully, Emma reported seeing glimpses of the mother she remembered from before Daniel died. On the 5th anniversary of Rose's death, Sarah stood in the bamboo grove at dawn. The stalks had grown to nearly 20 feet now, a forest of strength and flexibility. Early morning light filtered through them in shafts that looked almost holy. She wasn't alone. The coalition had made this an annual tradition. Margaret and Patricia with their lawn chairs, Diane with her son Tyler, who'd grown strong using the community center pool, Anna with all three of her children, including 6-year-old Thomas, named for Rose's husband, Leonard with his latest documentation project, Marcus and Lillian with coffee for everyone, and Emma, who'd become as much a part of this chosen family as anyone born into it. They stood in the bamboo grove as the sun rose, remembering Rose, remembering the fight, remembering everything that had changed. Sarah spoke the words that had become ritual. My mother taught me that bamboo survives everything. It bends in storms. It grows from fire. It can't be eliminated because it's not just one plant. It's a grove, roots connecting underground, supporting each other. She looked at the women around her, this family built from shared trauma and shared healing. We're the grove now. We're what my mother planted, and we'll keep growing. As the sun cleared the trees, Sarah noticed new bamboo shoots breaking through the soil. Even after 5 years, the grove kept expanding, new growth, new strength, unstoppable. That afternoon, Sarah taught a workshop at the community center, 30 women learning documentation techniques, some elderly, facing HOA abuse, some caregivers, learning to advocate for aging parents, some young activists carrying the fight forward. A girl in the back row, maybe 11 years old, raised her hand. Ms. Sarah, why do we keep planting bamboo everywhere? Sarah smiled. The question she'd been asked 100 times and would answer 100 more. Because bamboo teaches us 3 truths. First, strength isn't rigidity. It's flexibility. We bend in storms so we don't break. Second, growth takes patience. Bamboo can take years to show above ground, but when it emerges, nothing stops it. And third, we're stronger together. Bamboo never grows alone. It grows in groves, sharing roots, supporting each other. The girl nodded seriously, like Ms. Rose. Exactly like Ms. Rose. That evening, Sarah sat on the bench Thomas had built 43 years ago, the one that had survived Vivian's attempt to destroy it, and watched the bamboo sway in the sunset breeze. Her phone buzzed, a text from a woman in California who'd found the Bamboo Collective online. Her elderly mother facing HOA harassment. Could they help? Sarah typed it back quickly. Yes, you're not alone. We're bamboo. We bend, we survive, we win. She looked up at the bamboo forest, at this legacy Rose and Thomas had planted, at what it had become. The community center lights were coming on, warm and welcoming. Through the windows, she could see people gathering for evening programs, a book club, a caregiver support group, kids' art class. The place Vivian had tried to rule through fear had become a place of genuine connection. The bamboo she'd ordered destroyed had become a protected landmark. The elderly woman she'd targeted had become a hero whose name would outlive them all. Sarah thought about her mother's last words. Be bamboo, Bao Bei, always be bamboo. She'd spent 5 years learning what that meant. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just bending, but growing back stronger. Not just fighting alone, but building groves where women supported women. The bamboo swayed in the evening wind, 20 feet tall now, impossible to see where one stalk ended and another began. All connected underground, all supporting each other, all growing toward light. Sarah understood finally that her mother hadn't just taught her to survive. She'd taught her to plant, to grow, to create something that would outlast any one person's life. Rose Chen was gone, but the bamboo remained. The community center stood. The Bamboo Collective helped women every day. Sophia Morales and hundreds like her were learning that old people matter, that women's voices matter, that one person standing up can change everything. That was legacy, that was love, that was bamboo. Sarah stood from the bench and walked through the grove, trailing her fingers along the stalks, feeling their strength, their flexibility, their eternal patience. She thought about her mother, about Thomas, about every woman who'd ever been told she didn't matter and had planted something beautiful anyway. The bamboo whispered in the wind, and if Sarah listened carefully, she could almost hear her mother's voice in it. Be bamboo, Baobei. Be strong, be flexible, be unbreakable. And in being bamboo, change the world. Sarah walked out of the grove toward the community center, toward the women gathering there, toward the work that would continue long after she was gone. The sun set behind her, painting the bamboo in shades of gold. Some things bend but never break. Some things survive everything. Some things grow stronger every time you try to cut them down. Rose Chen had been bamboo. Sarah was bamboo. And anyone who chose courage over fear, flexibility over rigidity, community over isolation could be bamboo too. The grove would keep growing. The legacy would keep spreading. The fight would continue. Because that's what bamboo does. It survives, it persists, it wins. Always. The end.